you don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look at better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 8th part of What If Deku Learns Under the Batman. Smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Katsuki Bakugou, Shiksu High student Kami began walking down a dark alleyway. Having just left the testing arena, she managed to sneak away from the other students, saying that she wasn't feeling well and was taking a cab to the station. She had learned a lot from the exam, but not about being a hero. She had learned a lot about izukumidoriya. She wanted to know more. She wanted to know what made him so driven, why he was so intent at becoming a hero. She had hoped beyond hope the last time they met that he would have joined the League of Villains. Whatever All for One did to him didn't seem to have been enough to break his indomitable spirit. It was one of the things she admired about him. It reminded her of Stain. She was broken out of her thoughts when the cell phone in her pocket began to ring. "Hello," she said, answering it. "It's about time you picked up," said the voice of Mr. Compress on the other end. "Where are you right now?" As Kami walked, her body began to morph into the grayish mass from the exam. Bits of gray flesh began to drop to the floor as the face of Kami from Shiksu High transformed into the perversely smiling face of Himiko Toga. "I had the most wonderful fun today," Toga replied happily. "Don't get so lost in your role that you slip up," said Mr. Compress. "There's too much at stake for you to get caught." "Oh, don't worry," said Toga. "I've never been caught in my life." She lifted a small vial, admiring the tiny droplets of blood at the bottom. "And my mission was a success. I managed to get some of Izuku's yummy blood. Tomaru is going to be so happy." Class 1 all gathered in the common area of the dorms, chatting happily about the results from the exam. They would be starting class as normal tomorrow, and had to be ready for what the next semester had to offer. Izuku was sitting alone at the table at the far end of the room, going over his notebook. He had been toying with a few ideas for new support equipment to handle the weight of his quirk. The more he used it, the worse it hurt his hands. Using the design of his previous explosive gauntlets as a template, he figured he could create a new pair of gauntlets that allowed him to accumulate the excess nitroglycerin-like sweat from his hands, allowing for a more powerful explosive blast when activated while reducing impact and recoil. He figured that he could also modify his explosive batarangs to carry some of that sweat so he could detonate them at will without the use of a timer or trigger. After an hour or two, most of Class 1 shuffled off to bed, and he decided it was time for him to do the same. He didn't realize how tired he was until he reached his dorm room, collapsing on his bed, ready for sleep to take him. "What do you think you're doing?" came a voice from behind him. Izuku bolted up as if on a spring, reaching for his utility belt at his bedside to draw a batarang, but it was gone. He turned to see the source of the voice from the corner of his room, staring in shock to see the Kaken sitting in the chair in front of his computer. "Relax, Deku," he said. "You're dreaming. Your fancy tech won't help here." "What's going on?" said Izuku. "What are you doing here?" "You've got my quirk, idiot," said Kaken, rolling his eyes. "Believe it or not, I'm stuck with you." "But why do you keep showing up?" said Izuku. "You're supposed to be just an echo." "It's because of that green bastard," said Kaken. "It was his idea." "Green? You mean Jaeon?" asked Izuku. "This is his doing." "Yeah, the Martian," said Kaken. "Something about last line of defense or whatever. I'm basically here to keep you from losing your mind again." "So what are you, a ghost?" asked Izuku. "Hell if I know," said Kaken. "Do I look like a damn philosopher? This isn't how I wanted to spend my afterlife, you know, acting like some kind of firewall for your brain. All I know is that part of what makes me me now lives in you." "So what are you doing here now?" said Izuku. "Right now," said Kaken, standing. "We're gonna fight." "What?" said Izuku, taken aback. Right before his eyes, his room faded away, replaced instead with a cityscape, similar to Ground Beta, where he took the entrance exam. "We're settling this right here, right now," said Kaken, dropping into a fighting stance. "We're gonna see what makes a weakling like you so special as to attract the attention of both All Might and the Batman." "But why?" said Izuku. "I don't want to fight you." "Quit your bitchin'," snapped Kaken. "If you really think you're good enough to use my quirk, then you better show me what you're really made of." Before Izuku could protest further, Kaken used his quirk to launch himself forward at an alarming speed. Izuku lunged just in time to avoid a swift kick to his face. Izuku leapt backwards, correcting himself with a back handspring. You can't dodge forever, shouted Kaken, coming at him again. Fight me. Why are you doing this? Said Izuku, continuing to dodge Kaken's blasts. Look at you, said Kaken. You've been trained by one of the best heroes in the world and you won't even take a swing at a ghost. Kaken reared back and hit Izuku full force with an explosive blast, sending him backwards and through one of the buildings. Shockingly, he felt no pain, and after looking himself over saw that he wasn't injured. Then he remembered that he was technically dreaming, so he wouldn't feel any pain. This also meant that he didn't have any of his tools or weapons with him. This battle would be Quirk versus Quirk. You really don't see it, do you? Said Kaken, jumping through the opening in the wall that Izuku had made. You really don't see how lucky you are. I've been perfecting my Quirk ever since I was young, working my ass off to one day be good enough to get into UA, to be the best, only to be killed by a damn sludge monster. He launched another blast, causing Izuku to lunge out of the way before he was hit. But you, a quirkless nobody, got to go in my place, Kaken continued. You got to live my dreams, you were found and trained by Batman himself, and now you're the most popular kid in your class. Don't think I haven't seen it. Everyone looks up to you. They all worship you. But it should have been me, not you. Kaken continued his barrage, and Izuku continued to dodge. Every word that Kaken said hit Izuku like a ton of bricks. You're right, said Izuku. It should have been you. I wasn't trying to become popular, I was just trying to be the best. I wanted to live up to your memory. Who the hell asked you to? Said Kaken. It was your fault that I was killed in the first place, wasn't it? Kaken's words pierced Izuku's heart like a dagger. I didn't mean for it to happen, said Izuku. I just wanted to talk to All Might. And that's another thing, said Kaken. Why you? What do you mean? Said Izuku. Why would All Might offer his quirk to a loser like you? Said Kaken, launching another attack. Is it because you looked up to him more than I did? Are you more worthy than I am? He didn't see me as worthy at first, said Izuku, dodging the attack. And I didn't want his quirk. Why would you deny the one chance to gain ultimate power? Shouted Kaken. You'd think a quirkless weakling like you would be begging to inherit his power. Izuku's blood began to boil, his feelings of guilt now replaced with anger. You don't know what you're saying, Izuku said. I know enough, said Kaken. I'm a part of you now, aren't I? And I see you for who you really are, Deku, even if the others don't. You're still just the scared little boy pretending to be what you're not. You're wrong, said Izuku. Worthless Deku, Kaken continued. That's what I called you, remember. Stop it, quirkless weakling. Enough, Izuku shouted, launching an explosive blast at Kaken, who dodged swiftly, avoiding the blast by inches. I'm not your punching bag anymore, Kaken. I'm not the weak little Deku you picked on growing up. Deku is now the name of a hero. That's more like it, said Kaken. Show me what you've got. Izuku and Kaken continued their brawl. Izuku launched an attack at Kaken, who ducked under it, sending another blast at Izuku, who managed to shield himself in time. Izuku rallied, bounding off a wall from the force of the blast, and countering with an attack of his own, sending Kaken through the wall, and back out of the building they were fighting in, falling down towards the street. Izuku followed after him, only for Kaken to have corrected himself in mid-flight, launching him towards Izuku. The two collided, grappling in mid-air before falling and hitting the ground hard. Izuku bounded upwards and immediately began pressing his attack, grabbing Kaken by the shirt and landing several punches to his face. Kaken grabbed Izuku's fist and kicked him hard in the stomach, sending him backwards. Just like when we were kids, said Kaken. I could never get rid of you. No matter how many times I beat you up, you still would keep coming back. Is it because you always looked down on me? Did you think you were better than me? Is that what you think? I've looked up to you my entire life, shouted Izuku. When we were growing up, you never knew how I really felt. I had nothing, and you had everything. I hated how much you bullied me, but I could still see how amazing you were. You had so much that I didn't have. And though All Might was my hero, you were the one in my life. You were the closest thing to All Might that I could get. Izuku and Kaken launched towards each other, locking their hands as they struggled and grappled against each other. Izuku pulled backwards suddenly, throwing Kaken over his shoulder hard to the ground. Kaken wasted no time, bounding upwards and kicking Izuku square in the jaw. Izuku corrected himself with a backhand spring and shot another explosive blast at Kaken, who was sent flying backwards before hitting the ground hard. Are you all right? Said Izuku, running over to Kaken, extending his hand to help his friend up. Kaken simply raised his hand and blasted Izuku away from him, causing him to hit the wall of the building hard behind him. Don't look down on me, shouted Kaken. I'm not weak like you, Deku. Don't you dare look down on me. I'm not weak, Kaken, shouted Izuku, getting to his feet. Not anymore. And if this is what it's going to take to make you see that, then let's finish this. Kaken and Izuku launched themselves toward each other at breakneck speed. As they approached each other at a rapid speed, the two of them threw their hands forward, calling out the name of their signature move simultaneously. Howitzer impact. The resulting explosion destroyed the buildings around them, cracking and rocking the very foundations of the city, leaving the surrounding area around them a smoking crater. Soon, the dust settled, revealing a triumphant Kaken standing over a defeated Izuku, pinning him to the ground with his foot on his chest. I win, said Kaken. Yeah, said Izuku bitterly. You win, just like you always did. Go ahead and gloat. Go ahead and tell me I'm. Shut up, said Kaken, interrupting him. Surprisingly, he held out his hand and helped Izuku to his feet. Do you really think I didn't expect this to happen? Izuku was at a loss for words. What are you talking about? He said. I live in your head, Deku, said Kaken, explaining it as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. I've seen all your training, what happened with the League of Villains, getting my quirk, fighting the Joker, all of it. I knew you would lose this fight. Then why did you want to fight me, if you knew you would win? Asked Izuku. I warned you that you better not lose, said Kaken. And I'm here to make sure you don't. If you're going to have my quirk, then you better learn how to use it properly. Anytime I don't feel like you're measuring up, I'll be here to chew your ass out, you got it. Izuku couldn't help but laugh. What? Said Kaken, irritably. What's so damn funny, nerd? You're still the exact way I remember you, said Izuku. Before. He paused, suddenly solemn. Kaken, I'm sorry. It was my fault you got killed. I shouldn't. Shut up, said Kaken, rolling his eyes again. You really think that matters now, after all this? It does to me, said Izuku indignantly. I've been carrying this with me since you died. Well, of course you should feel bad, said Kaken. What kind of psychopath would you be if you didn't? But at least you got the bastard back for it. You know about that. I've seen your memories, dumbass, of course I know. Oh, right, said Izuku. He paused for a minute, silence stretching between them. So that's what this was about, then. Goading me into this fight. This was to teach me about letting go. Looks like you're not as stupid as you look, said Kaken. If you keep holding on to what happened to me, you're letting weakness into your heart. It's gonna make you sloppy, and it's gonna get you killed. And as much as it pains me to admit it, he pulled a face as if it really did cause him discomfort. You're not as weak as you used to be. Your training with Batman obviously squashed the wuss out of you. But that doesn't mean you can't improve. Just stop holding yourself back, and you better not lose again. Izuku saw Kaken and the world around them drift away as he regained consciousness, waking up in his bed. He was drenched in sweat, but was otherwise fine. He reached over on the nightstand next to him and checked his phone. 6:30 a.m. The fight with Kaken had lasted the entire night. He sat up in his bed for an hour longer, contemplating what had transpired. It was as vivid to him as if he had just witnessed it on a projected screen, and didn't seem to fade with time. It had given him a lot to think about, but he would have to do that later. Second semester assembly would start soon, so he had to get ready to get there on time. If he was to remain true to his promise to Kaken, he still had a lot to do to get stronger. Hi there, said Principal Nezu cheerfully to the assembled classes. I'm so happy to see such bright and happy faces here today, even in light of such recent struggles our school and society has seen. All the teachers all stood in a row in front of the podium where he was addressing the students, consisting of first, second, and third years from the hero courses. This was the first assembly that they had since the students moved into the dorm rooms, and they had a lot to address. You'll notice that the fur that I am so proud of has deteriorated as of late, said Nezu. I haven't been taking care of it. The same can happen to you students as well. Even if you eat a healthy balance of vitamins and minerals, you won't get a mane of luscious locks unless you're getting lots of sleep. That's the secret. He giggled to himself as if he told himself a funny joke as the students around him exchanged baffled glances at such an odd start to his speech. My own sleep patterns have been upset by the incidents that took place over summer vacation, said Nezu, shooting All Might a sad glance. We lost a pillar of hope, the ramifications of which have appeared faster than I could have ever imagined. And there will likely be even more chaos in our world in the near future. This will be most apparent to you hero students. You must approach extracurricular activities, including your work-study opportunities, with greater caution in light of such recent events. Work-study, said Ashido, curiously. Maybe they're the next level, like the internships we did, suggested Asui. As Nezu continued his speech, All Might's mind began to drift to his conversation with the principal before he had been hired at UA High, over a year ago. It was before he had met young Midoriya and the events that transpired after that. He He was beginning to feel the full weight of his injuries and how it was affecting his quirk, and decided it was time to begin looking for a successor in earnest. If you're looking for a successor, the principal had said to him, there's no place overflowing with more raw talent than UA High. Consider coming to teach for us. Given your current state, I would recommend cutting back on the hero work anyway. I have no doubt that someone worthy of your power walks the halls of our fine schools. He hadn't given it much thought since he had returned from Gotham, but he supposed that now would be a good time to continue his search for another successor. A part of him was still hesitant, as he was secretly still holding out hope that young Midoriya would accept it. At first, it was obvious that his denial was initially out of spite for the way All Might had treated him when they first met. Now, he had hoped that since Midoriya had inherited a quirk of his own, and that their relationship had taken a turn for the better, perhaps he would be more open to becoming the next successor to One for All. He knew it was unlikely, and that sooner or later he may have to begin his search anew, but something was holding him back from passing it on to anyone but Midoriya. A gut feeling that he couldn't fully identify. He just hoped that he wasn't just putting off the inevitable. The principal had dismissed the assembly, and the students began to make their way back to their home classrooms. Izuku's mind was buzzing. His interest piqued at the principal's mention of work studies for hero students. Aizawa hadn't said anything about it, so he was thinking perhaps it was more for second or third years, but he couldn't abate his curiosity as to what they pertained. He was shaken abruptly out of his thoughts as he had the strange suspicion he was being watched. Looking up from his notebook, he could tell that his hunch was correct, as everyone around him seemed to be staring at him as he walked by. He supposed that he shouldn't be surprised, considering all that had happened over the summer. Izuku was no longer known as the first quirkless student to be accepted to UA High. His new claim to fame was that he was the first known quirkless student to have obtained a quirk from someone else. Not only did he survive a villain attack, he was also patient zero for quirk appropriation, something that no one thought possible. Izuku had a feeling that no matter how hard he tried, he would never be able to escape the spotlight. It would always find him, whether he wanted it or not. Hey, there he is. Do you see him? Do you? A bubbly, excited third-year student with light blue hair was patting another student in front of her on the back as Midoriya walked past them. He had a simple-looking face with a shock of perfectly coiffed blonde hair, with a strong, muscular frame that stood well over most of his peers. He watched in silence as Midoriya continued on his way. He had heard the others talking about him, how he was the quirkless student who had taken down the hero killer, as well as the one taken by the League of Villains and tried to get him to join them. He had seen the news reports on how the leader villain had tried to use him as leverage against All Might, and had forcibly given him a quirk to use against him, but was able to escape with the help of All Might, Batman, and the other pro-heroes. It was the greatest story that he had ever heard. This first year had already seen more combat and faced more villains and adversity than any other hero student at this school, and he wasn't even in his second semester. He had to meet this Izukumidoriya. Twice of the League of Villains continued his patrol across the city. The League was currently scattered across various locations in an effort to cover their tracks and recruit new comrades since the incident at Kamino Ward. Without leadership from All for One, their mysterious benefactor, Tamura Shigaraki, stepped in to assume full control of the League's operations. His goal was to make the organization bigger than it has ever been. Before he was found by the League of Villains and adopting the moniker of Twice, Jin Bubegawara was one of those guys that like to cause trouble. His quirk is able to make a clone of himself or someone else, and then make clones from that clone, and so on and so forth. He used to clone himself and make his clones do everything for him, ruling as a king a kingdom of copies. But soon the other clones began to wonder why they were taking orders, and had attacked him. It wasn't long before the clones began to turn on each other, eventually destroying themselves in an effort to find the real Bubegawara. This had left a psychological scar on him, and since then he was never quite sure if he was the original or one of the clones. He knew there was no place in the world for his madness. Heroes only care about saving good citizens. But the League accepted him as he was, and welcomed him into their family with open arms. He liked to think that he was able to accept himself as well, so long as he was with them. Twice stopped in his tracks as he heard a loud explosion from 2 blocks away. He ran towards the source of the explosion as fast as he could. Because of All Might's retirement after Kamino Ward, small-time thugs were beginning to band together in an attempt to form their own villain groups to fill the void of power left behind by the symbol of peace. Most of them were simply posers and pretenders, but the League was there to find anyone who had the resolve and drive to join their ranks. Perhaps whoever caused this explosion would be the special kind of wackos they were looking for. Twice peered into the alleyway as several civilians ran for their lives away from the explosion. There was an overturned truck that was roaring with bright orange flames that threatened to consume it. But that wasn't the most shocking aspect of the scene before him. What was left of what appeared to be several small-time thugs were strewn about the area around them. Mainly, they were discarded body parts, but upon the truck Twice noticed that a few of the men seemed to be, for lack of a better word, melded with the burning truck, their body parts seemingly attached to the chassis as if some sort of macabre ornaments. 3 men stood and watched the truck as it continued to burn. 3 grown adults get together and their first thought is to rob a convenience store ATM, said the man in the middle, who appeared to be the leader of the 3 men. He wore a green coat with a purple wool lining that stuck out at the neck of the coat. He wore simple white gloves on his hands, and his face was obscured by a beak-like mask. His cohorts wore different variations of the same beak-like mask. A group this big, they should have aimed for a loftier goal, he continued, tapping the tip of his mask absently. We should skedaddle before the authorities get here, Overhaul, said one of the other masked villains. But the middle villain Overhaul didn't appear to be listening, continuing to mumble to himself. They're all sick, he said. Every last one of them. What they need is a cure. Twice considered the odd scene before him. It looks as if he had found his wackos. Class 1 all sat in their desks, ready to begin the next semester of their hero training journey. The provisional licensing exam had taken a lot out of them, and due to the fact that one of them had not successfully passed the exam, they had fallen behind their counterparts in Class 1B, who had all managed to pass the exam successfully. Todoroki had taken this shame personally, but Izuku and the others did their best to remind him that it wasn't a competition. Izuku found his mind wandering. He still was wrestling with his fight with Kaken in his dream the night before and the things that he said to him. He still had so much to learn about his quirk, and knew that he was going to have to work twice as hard as his peers, who had the luxury of developing their quirks over their entire lives. But, whether he was an echo, ghost, or whatever, Izuku was glad that he had Kaken on his side. All right, listen up, said Aizawa. The class immediately fell silent. Starting today we'll resume our regular classes and training schedule. I know a lot has happened recently. However, you need to switch gears and focus on your school duties. This semester you will have even harsher training than before. He can't mean that, can he? Ashida whispered to Asui. Aizawa shot her a glare, and she fell silent. Mr. Aizawa, said Asui, raising her hand. What were those things the principal said about hero work studies? Is that something the upperclassmen participate in? There was a chittering of agreement between the students at her question. Izuku had been wondering about that as well. They had attended internships in their last semester in an effort to gain hands-on experience doing hero work. Perhaps they were similar to that. Aizawa sighed, scratching his head in thought. I was planning to talk more about those things at a later date, he said. But I suppose telling you now is more logical. Simply put, it's work outside of class. They're like the internships you did at the pro-hero agencies before, only closer to the real thing. Wait, then why did we work so hard at the sports festival? Said Uraraka. That's a good point, said Ida. Wasn't the whole point to get scouted by hero agencies? You'll be using your connections made from the festival to secure a work study, said Aizawa. It's basic networking. Please keep in mind that this also isn't part of your normal classwork. It's discretionary for each student. For those of you who weren't scouted at the sports festival may have a harder time getting a work-study position. But you also have the fact due to the recent influx of villain activity, there is a sharp increase in demand for licensed heroes. This is why the school has decided to allow first years to participate in work studies as well. Anyways, we'll discuss the work studies program in more detail at a later date, Aizawa continued. In the meantime, you have more important things to focus on. Your first priority is to the hero course, training yourselves to be the best heroes you can be. That's all. Aizawa then excused himself as Present Mike entered the class for their English lesson. Izuku and his classmates returned to the dorm rooms after a hard day of class. It was mostly lectures, but it was clear they were upping the ante on their coursework. It was only the start of the term and Izuku already felt like he was starting to fall behind. As he made his way down the street towards the trash, his mind was buzzing a mile a minute. He had no idea how he was going to balance his coursework with this new work-study idea, not to mention his training at the warehouse. He was beginning to wonder if Izuku dropped the trash bags and drew a batarang from his belt. He had the sudden feeling as if he was being watched, and his instincts knew better than to take any chances. Looking around him, he found the source of the foreboding as his eyes fell on the wall of the building beside him. Protruding out of the wall like a mask hanging on a hook was a cheerfully smiling face. The features of the face were simple and plain looking, but with piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through Izuku. At first he thought he was going crazy, or having another one of his weird vision episodes, like with Kaken at the licensure exam. But after blinking several times, the face remained. "Wow," said the face, looking at the raised batarang. "If you don't like my company, you should just say so, no need to get physical." He spoke in a joking, jovial manner, the smile on his face broadening. Izuku didn't answer, nor did he drop the batarang. The face looked down at the trash bags on the ground. "You're heading to the trash," the face said. "You can throw away the food trays with the burnables, you know. They go over that way." A hand seemed to protrude from the wall below the face, pointing in the direction of the incinerator before sinking back into the wall. Izuku stared at the spot the face used to occupy, not entirely sure what had happened. "So you must be that first year that everyone's talking about," came the voice of the face again. This time, it was below him. Izuku leapt backwards instinctively, dropping into a fighting stance. The smiling face was now protruding from the sidewalk in front of him. "Seriously though, you're not going to throw that thing at me," said the face, nodding towards the batarang. "I heard those things explode." "Who or what are you?" said Izuku, returning the batarang to his belt. The face laughed gleefully. "Not a bad question there, my friend," it said. "I admit, sometimes I even weird myself out. But don't worry, you're going to find out who I am soon enough. People have been talking a lot about you, and I just wanted to see what all the fuss was about. Glad to see that you've got a fighting spirit about you. Can't say I'm surprised considering all you've been through. See you soon." Without another word, the face melted back into the sidewalk and did not return, leaving Izuku even more bewildered than before. As he picked up the trash from the ground, something was nagging at him. He could swear that he had seen that plain-looking face before, but he couldn't place as to where. "All right, listen up," said Aizawa at the start of class the next day. "Today we're going to go into more detail about what the work studies will entail, and what it means for you first years." Izuku looked up from his notebook, rapt at attention. He had been waiting for this since Aizawa mentioned it a few days ago. Aizawa and the rest of the teachers had been closed-mouthed about it since then, despite the class's desire to learn more. Aizawa stretched slightly, as if he was already bored with the subject, and looked towards the door. "Come on in now," he said. The door to the classroom opened to reveal 3 third-year students, marching towards the front of the room. One of them was a short, blue-haired young woman with a bubbly smile on her face. Though she stood at least a foot below her other 2 classmates, a confidence radiated about her that placed her on equal footing with the others. The second upperclassman, trailing behind the other 2, looked sullen and withdrawn, his hair covering his eyes, keeping his hands in his pockets and hunched over, looking as if he would rather be anywhere else but there. Izuku did a double take as he looked at the final upperclassman, the one leading the group as they marched in. He was tall, and was powerfully built in terms of his physique. Izuku would have recognized that plain-looking face and unending smile anywhere. It was the face that emerged from the wall to talk to him a few nights ago. "Today I'm going to have people who have experienced work-study opportunities firsthand explain what they are like," said Aizawa. "I suggest you listen carefully as they explain how they differ from the internships you performed last semester." He gestured to the 3 students at the front of the class. "These 3 are third years at UA," he continued. "They rank at the very top of our student body. You may know them as the Big 3. The class murmured amongst each other in excitement. These 3 students were legends at UA High among third years, the best of the best the school had to offer. If anyone had the best prospects at becoming a hero, it was these 3. In fact, they were already professional heroes on paper, only needing to graduate before transitioning to full-time status. The best of the hero course," said Zero in awe. "Wow," said Ishido excitedly. Looking over the plain-faced third year, Izuku suddenly had a flash of realization. Seeing more than just his face, he was finally able to remember where he had seen him before. His name was Mirio Tagata, and he was on TV from the UA Sports Festival the year before Izuku attended. His performance in the festival was subpar at best, but he left a strong impression on the audience due to the fact that his quirk, permeation, caused his clothes to fall off while broadcasting live. He remembered that the other 2 third years there didn't take any medals home during the festival either, yet they were all the top that the school had to offer. It made Izuku wonder how they were able to obtain the title of UA's Big 3. "Get to it," said Aizawa unceremoniously. "Introduce yourselves briefly. Let's start with Amajiki." The slouching student reacted by sending an intense look throughout the class that seemed to pierce through them to their very souls. Izuku found himself surprised by the sheer intensity in this student's gaze before Amajiki suddenly began to tremble terribly. "I just can't," he said, his voice shaking. "No words are coming out. My mind is blank. My mouth is dry. I want to go home." He suddenly turned on his heel, placing his head against the wall. The class was left in stunned silence. "Come on, Amajiki," laughed the blue-haired third year. "You need to have the heart of a lion, not a kitten. You know, even though you're a human." She giggled at her own joke, turning to the class. "This is our kitten, Tamaki Amajiki, and my name is Nighteye Hado. You first years have a really exciting time ahead of you with work studies." "Hey, wait, hold on," she said suddenly, running up to a stunned Shoji. "Why are you wearing a mask?" Shoji stared at her in disbelief. It was as if she completely forgot what she was there to talk to them about. Well," he began. "Oh, well," Hado said, walking instead over to Todoroki, leaving her question to Shoji unanswered. "You must be Todoroki, right? How did you get that big burn on your face?" Todoroki flinched slightly. "That's none of your." "And, Ashido," Hado continued, moving away from Todoroki. "If your horns break off, do you think you'll grow new ones?" She continued jumping from person to person with inane questions, moving to the next person before they could be answered. Though she was one of the big three, she appeared to Izuku to be a complete airhead. However, experience told Izuku that appearances can be deceiving, so he didn't think too much about it. "This is completely irrational," said Aizawa. His quirk had activated, his eyes glowing red as it did when he was agitated. Tagada seemed to have picked up on this and quickly stepped in. "There's no need for you to worry, Eraserhead," he said. "I'll get the audience refocused." He turned to the class and with as much bravado and showmanship as he could muster announced to them the future's gonna be. He paused, holding his hand to his ear, expecting the class to answer him back. They all just sat in stunned silence. This was not at all how they were expecting finally meeting the big three would go. Despite their reputations, they were not making a very good first impression. "Awful," said Tagada, as if the answer was obvious. "The future's gonna be awful. That's your part, guys." "Aw, man," my call and response was a total fail. He threw his head back in raucous laughter. Okay, Tagada said, centering himself after a moment. "I guess it's hard for you guys to know what's going on. We're just third years who showed up to explain a program that's completely voluntary. I can see how you'd be confused by that." He paused for a minute, thinking to himself, "You guys got your provisional licenses as first years, right? You've proven to be pretty darn energetic. I got it." He slammed his fist in his hand, startling the class. "The new plan is, you first years all fight me at once." The class murmured to each other in blatant confusion. Izuku couldn't help but share in their confusion. If they were supposed to be talking to them about work-study programs, how would fighting help them? Aizawa seemed to be thinking along the same lines. "Explain to me how that is relevant in any way," he said. "Well," said Tagada, scratching his nose, "if you want them to experience our experience, this is a pretty rational way of doing it then. Right, Eraserhead?" "Rational." Aizawa paused for a minute. "Do whatever you want," he said finally. Class 1 gathered around at one of the training grounds, all wearing their gym uniforms. Tagada was stretching and warming himself up, preparing for the upcoming battle. Privately, Izuku was excited. He had already seen Tagada's ability up close, but it would be another thing entirely to see it performed in combat. The other students were too stunned by Tagada's behavior to know what to think. "Is he for real?" asked Zero. "Totes real," said Tagada cheerfully. "You're impossible." "Mirio," said Amajiki, leaning his head against the wall on the other side of the room. "It would have been simple enough for us to just tell them." "Where's the fun in that?" said Tagada. "I'm serious," said Amajiki. "Think about how bad it'll look if some of them don't recover after fighting you. No one wants to spend the next few years in a hospital bed." "Seriously," said Mainta, concerned. "I bet he's just trying to psyche us out," said Kirishima. "Let's think about this," said Takoyami. "You're obviously a lot further ahead than us, but we've fought pros before. Not to mention we took down some legitimate villains," said Kirishima proudly. "We're not a bunch of wannabes." "Word," said Tagada. "But you're gonna have to show me that's the truth. Now, who's gonna start this party?" "I've got this," said Kirishima. "Kirishima, wait," said Izuku, but it was too late. Kirishima was already running at full speed, finally lunging towards Tagada, who stood completely still. Not even his smile faded. Kirishima threw a heavy kick towards Tagada's face, which completely passed right through it. Kirishima balked with surprise while in midair, tumbling and hitting the ground hard. The rest of the class gasped in collective shock as Tagada's clothes seemed to fall off him and drop to the floor, leaving him stark naked. "Oopsie," he said, trying to put his pants back on. "My quirk's kinda tricky." Zero, Ashido, Aoyama and the other long-distance fighters attacked him with their quirks, but like Kirishima before them, they passed right through him. Izuku threw an explosive batarang along with the attacks, but when the smoke cleared, Tagada was gone. "Where'd he go?" said Kaminari, panicking. Everyone turned at the sound of a loud scream behind them. Toga had appeared behind Gyro, coming up from the ground, stark naked, and startling her completely. Izuku's mind was racing. He was trying to take out the long-distance fighters first. With lightning speed he quickly moved between Gyro, Takoyami, Zero, and Mineta, disabling them with a single punch to the solar plexus. "This is crazy. How did this guy luck out with such a powerful quirk?" shouted Kirishima. Izuku saw it differently. As Toga mowed down his classmates, he could see that it was more than just his quirk that made him powerful, but his skill in using it. It had to take immense training and ability to use a quirk to this level of proficiency. He moved so quickly that it was already hard to see him, and it didn't help that it was difficult to determine where he would appear again once he disappeared into the floor beneath them. Toga finished taking down the final long-distance fighter, standing proudly over his achievement, leaving the rest of the class shocked and dismayed at how quickly he had defeated their allies. "How did he do that so quickly?" said Kirishima. "It's one thing to be able to phase through stuff, but is he able to warp as well?" said Uraraka. "He's unrivaled," said Ajiro. "Do we even stand a chance?" "Hold on, everyone," said Izuku. "There's more to his quirk than what we're seeing. Even if he can pass through objects, he's still landing his attacks directly. That's how we beat him, by countering him just before his attack makes contact." "Right," said Kirishima. "So you think you've figured out my quirk," said Toga. "But let's see if it'll help you win." He took off towards them with impressive speed, dropping into the ground once again. "He's underground," shouted Sato. Everyone began looking for a possible exit point. Izuku pondered for a moment. If he had to guess, he would expect him to appear from. Izuku turned on his heel, launching an explosive blast directly into the face of a stunned Toga. Izuku lunged through the smoke from his explosion, throwing a powerful kick towards his foe, only for it to pass right through him. Toga used Izuku's momentum to thrust his fingers towards Izuku's face, who shielded his eyes before they made contact. Izuku realized it was a ruse, as seconds later a solid punch connected with his abdomen. "You predicted where I'd come out," he heard Toga say. "And you tried to counter. Impressive. But I've trained myself and learned how to work around them. Pretty good try, though." Toga continued his rampage throughout the rest of the short-range fighters, one by one, knocking them to their knees, before finally standing above them, forming a triumphant pose. "Power!" Toga's victory cry was cut short as a batarang nearly connected with his head. He only just activated his quirk before it had reached its target. Surprised, Toga looked at the source, seeing Izuku rising to his feet, shaking slightly but otherwise unharmed. "You're gonna have to do better than that," he said, dropping back into a fighting stance. Toga couldn't repress a smile. "I knew you had a fighting spirit about you," he said. "Still, it's hard to believe you're still standing. That attack usually puts people down for the count." "I've been hit harder," said Izuku. "We'll see about that," said Toga, disappearing into the ground below him. Izuku didn't react. Toga was trying to bait him into moving prematurely. He had to wait for the most opportune moment before striking back. In a flash, Toga appeared from the floor again. He moved as fast as lightning towards Izuku, whose back was still turned to him. He was ready to deliver the final blow. This fight would soon be over. Izuku turned at the last second, catching Toga's fist in his hands. Toga balked in surprise, activating his quirk instinctively to protect his face. Instead, however, Izuku delivered a powerful sweeping kick to his knees, knocking him aloft. Izuku tried to use Toga's own weight against him as he fell to deliver a knee kick to his abdomen, but Toga passed right through it and back into the floor. Izuku used his quirk to lunge backwards, gaining some distance and a vantage point in the air. Toga appeared from floor, launching high into the air towards Izuku, who used his quirk in an attempt to force him back. Toga phased through the smoke, slightly disappointed. He had to know that his explosive blasts wouldn't be effective. Midoriya seemed to be acting out of panic as he advanced on him. "No," Toga thought. "This is a trick." Sure enough, as he cleared the smoke, Midoriya was no longer in sight. Just as Toga was phasing through the ground to hide his movements, Midoriya was using the smoke from his explosions to hide himself from Toga. Turning in midair, Toga activated his quirk just in time before another set of explosive batarangs collided with him. Izuku used his quirk to launch himself forward towards Toga, who let him pass through him, grabbing him by the ankle as he did. Using all the strength he could muster, he attempted to thrust Midoriya downwards towards the floor of the training hall, but with sickening surprise, realized that Midoriya had used his quirk to spin himself in midair, allowing him to build up momentum enough to throw Toga downwards towards the floor instead. As Toga came tumbling down to the hard ground below, Izuku used his quirk to follow behind him. He knew that Toga would use his quirk to prevent himself from getting hurt from the fall, and would try to pass through the ground. but Izuku was ready. As soon as Tagada resurfaced, that was his window. Sure enough, a few seconds later, Tagada emerged from the ground below. Izuku let loose with a powerful explosive blast that filled the stadium with smoke. Aizawa coughed violently, trying to clear the smoke around him. These kids were getting too out of hand. He had to stop it before. As the smoke dissipated, Aizawa saw Tagada and Midoriya standing across from each other, their battle finished, panting heavily from combat fatigue, but unharmed. Checking the rest of the other incapacitated students, he could see that they too were unharmed from the chaos around them. Well, thought Aizawa, it appears they know how to show a little restraint after all. Aizawa took a moment to reflect on Midoriya and Tagada and found a striking similarity between the two of them. It was no wonder they were on such equal footing with each other. They were both products of the hard work they put in to develop their talents and abilities, and would stop at nothing until their goal is reached. In his mind, Tagada was the most logical person to advance to the title of #1 hero in Japan, and that was including the current pros in the field. However, Aizawa had to admit, he had some staunch competition in Midoriya. "Sorry if you all got a peek at my willy," said Tagada cheerfully. Once the class began to recover from Tagada's attacks, he gathered them around for a quick discussion. "My quirk is a little tricky, but it's also pretty strong." "No fair," said Hagakure. "Our quirks are nothing compared to yours." "How did you get so strong?" said Ishido. "Well, that's what I'm here to tell you," said Tagada. "My quirk is called permeation. That means I have the ability to pass through objects." "How were you able to launch yourself out of the ground at different places?" said Izuku. He wished he had his notebook with him to write this down. "I activate my quirk in my entire body, and I can pass through anything I want, including solid ground," said Tagada. "And whenever I release my quirk while I'm falling through the ground, I get repelled upwards out of the ground at high speeds." "I see," said Izuku. "The Pauli exclusion principle. Objects with mass cannot overlap." "Exactly," said Tagada. "By adjusting the direction I'm facing or the pose I'm holding, I can change the angle I come out at so I can aim at different spots." "You can avoid any attack and move where you want in an instant," said Asui, amazed. "You were born with a really strong quirk." "Not true," said Tagada. "My quirk is only strong because I made it that way." "What do you mean?" said Todoroki. "Let me put it this way," said Tagada. "While my quirk is activated, my lungs can't hold in oxygen. Even if I try to breathe in, the air will pass right through. In the same way my eardrums don't work, and my retinas can't take in sunlight. I can pass through anything, but that also means I can't feel anything while I'm in that state. Even though I have a body, I can't stop falling. I could probably keep falling forever." Izuku felt anxiety rushing to his mind just thinking about the sensation Tagada was describing. It must have been very frightening the first time his quirk had activated, completely falling without the ability to see, hear, or even breathe. "That's why if I want to pass through a solid object, such as a wall," Tagada continued, "I have to concentrate really hard. I'll activate everything except one leg. Then I'll release the other leg and land on it. Then the first leg is the last one to go through. Even for a simple move like that there are a bunch of little steps involved." "Oh man," said Kaminari. "If I was in a hurry I'd mess that up each time. As you can guess, when I was growing up I was always falling behind," Tagada continued. "In no time, I'd drop to dead last. I dropped my pants a lot too," he chuckled to himself. "In order to get to the top with this quirk, I couldn't just hope things would get better. I had to work hard, think faster, learn to make combat decisions, learn to predict my enemy's moves. And I picked up a few new tricks. What made this all possible in the first place was experience, and I was able to use what I have learned to further develop my quirk and abilities. This fight was a roundabout way to get that point across, to show you what a culmination of experience can bring you." These words resonated profoundly with Izuku. At first, Tagada's quirk held him back, just as Izuku's lack of quirk did, but with his experience and training, he was able to find strength in his weaknesses, just as Tagada did. It was what Bruce had been teaching him all throughout his training. It wasn't all the technology that made Batman so dangerous, but it was from the sheer amount of training and experience that his crusade had allotted him. "In our work studies, we are not treated as guests like we are in our internships," said Tagada. "We're regarded as one of the sidekicks, or even as a pro. That can be super scary. Pros can get hurt, and sometimes they end up watching people die. But even that is a powerful learning experience that you can't get inside a classroom, even at UA. That's what makes work studies so valuable. And personally, even though I know you're only first years, I can see that you already have what it takes to make it in your work studies." His eyes settled on Izuku as he said this, as if he was speaking directly to him. Everyone began chatting excitedly amongst each other in response to Togata's speech. Izuku couldn't blame them. Reflecting on the events in Gotham, the Hasu incident with the hero killer, and taking down the sludge villain, he realized that he had been presented with more experience and more opportunity to perform hero work than the rest of his class, most of it under the radar. With each battle he had learned more about himself, and had grown in strength and ability. But even still he knew that there was still a lot he could learn, and now that he had his provisional license, he could legally operate as a full-fledged hero. He couldn't wait to get started. Togata, Hado, and Amajiki all made their way out of the training hall after their demonstration, ready to head back to class. Despite a rocky first impression, Togata felt that their presentation had been a success. "I thought you were gonna hurt them by accident," said Hado. "But it all turned out okay." "Way to go, Mirio." "It was kind of touch and go there for a little bit," Mirio agreed. "And they saw me naked." "Yeah, but did anyone surprise you?" asked Hado. "I wanna know." "Come on, spill." "Well, I usually defeat people using the element of surprise," said Togata. "It's my basic strategy in a nutshell. But that guy Midoriya was able to analyze my moves and predict what I would do with near-perfect accuracy. I haven't had a fight as tough as him in a long time, and he's only in his first year." "Isn't that the kid who was trained by Batman?" said Amajiki. "Yeah, and he took down the hero killer, too," said Togata, beaming with excitement. "You know, I bet Sir would love to meet him." "Huh? Work-study opportunities." Dick Grayson was sitting at his desk in his apartment complex in Bloodhaven. He was going over the details of one of the cases he was working on when he received a call from Izuku. "I was wondering," Izuku said, "since I did my internship with you, and you're the leader of the Titans, if there are any opportunities with them for UAS work-studies program." "Sorry, kid," said Dick glumly. "The Titans don't have an agency in Japan, and I'm stuck in Bloodhaven buried under 1,000 cases. I volunteered to do the internship thing since it was only temporary, and so I could finally get a chance to meet you. Have you talked to Bruce? Maybe the Justice League has something for you." "I thought the Justice League didn't operate in Japan," said Izuku. "Well, that was the old policy," said Dick. "The Justice League focused more on worldwide threats, leaving day-to-day hero work to individual hero agencies. However, since the Kamino Ward incident and All Might's retirement, they've been looking to expand their operation to Japan to help ease the power vacuum there. Maybe he has something for you." Izuku was standing outside a large office building in Musastafu. Izuku's heart was beating in his chest. When he had spoken to Bruce about the work-studies program, he was worried that he would forbid him from doing it, citing reasons such as it would interfere with his training or something like that. But instead, Bruce had handed him a business card with the address of the building before him, telling him that he could do worse than this place, and left it at that. Izuku steeled himself and walked through the door. He found himself in the lobby of the building. It was posh and very well decorated. Fine art lined the walls with various models and statues adorning the tables and centerpieces. A secretary sat at a desk on the far end of the room, busily typing at a computer. Izuku approached the desk and cleared his throat. The secretary did not notice him. Excuse me," said Izuku. "I was told to come here about a work study." "Name?" the secretary interrupted, without looking up. "Oh, Izukumidoriya," he said awkwardly. The secretary finally looked up at him, eyeing him curiously. Without a word, she picked up the phone from the receiver and began to dial an extension. Izuku waited patiently as the call dialed. "It's me," she said finally. "He's here." After a moment or so, she placed the phone back onto the receiver. "You can go in. He's expecting you," she said to Izuku. She pressed a button on her desk, which opened the security door into the building. Izuku walked through the doors, trying hard to steady his trembling hands. He entered upon a large hallway connecting with several rooms. As he passed, the rooms included various training areas, a gym, what looked like a medical wing, and many others that were close to him. As he looked through one of the doorways that led to the training halls, he could see several professional heroes and their sidekicks going through their regimens. Some of them were performing drills on an obstacle course, others were participating in sparring matches. Izuku hadn't seen so many heroes in one place since his trip to the watchtower. "Pretty neat, huh?" said a voice from behind him. Izuku jumped out of his skin, turning to see a tall man standing next to him. He was handsome, in his late 30s to early 40s, with a shock of blonde hair that was perfectly coiffed with a matching blonde goatee on his face. He had a powerful build, and was wearing a black long-sleeved t-shirt, jeans, and a green leather jacket. "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you," said the man, chuckling to himself. "You backkids are always so jumpy. You must be Izukumidoriya. My name is Oliver Queen. Great to finally meet you." He stuck his hand out for Izuku to shake it. As he did, Izuku couldn't help but stare in complete awe. Bruce had sent him to the Green Arrow. The air here is thick with dust, it's gonna make me sick. Twice stepped lively as he walked towards the old abandoned warehouse that was the League's current hideout. He was guiding the beak-masked ringleader of the men he met in the alleyway. This guy's Quirk was too powerful to be some low-level street thug. He was the real deal, and Twice was sure that Shigaraki would think so as well. "Join the club," said Twice, replying to the man's comment. "The guys inside have been sick for a while." The man coughed, but said nothing. As they entered through the warehouse door, Shigaraki and the others looked up from their conversation. "Well now," Shigaraki said, "you've brought us a pretty big catch, huh, Twice?" "You think so?" said the man in the mask. "That's strange, coming from the leader of the League of Villains." "What gives?" said Magni. "Is this guy famous or something?" "My master showed me a picture of him before," said Shigaraki. "He's Yakuza, the young head of the Shai Hasekai, Chisaki." All for One had told Shigaraki of the various Yakuza groups from his day, ruling Japan's dark criminal empire. His master found them useful and would often utilize their criminal ties to help him in his work. Slowly over time, however, as the Hero Society began to thrive, the groups began to disband, one by one, until they became nothing more than petty thugs, struggling to survive. "What's a Yakuza thug from the slums doing here?" said Magni. "Maybe you're excited about All Might's retirement, too." "I'm more interested in All for One's absence," said Chisaki. Shigaraki reacted slightly to the name of his master, but didn't respond. The old-timers always feared the Dark Master, even after rumors of his death. Most people my age thought he was just an urban legend, until Kamino Ward, that is. Now that he's been thrown into Tartarus and All Might's retired, both sides are now leaderless. Who will take their place, I wonder? "You know who my master is," said Shigaraki, stepping forward. "But you've still got the nerve to ask that. Sounds like a challenge. I'm the next leader. Even now, I'm gathering my troops, and as our numbers grow, I'll turn Hero Society to dust." "Do you have an actual plan?" said Chisaki, unconvinced. "Watch your tongue and tone," said Shigaraki dangerously. "I thought you wanted to join up with us." "A goal without a plan is just a wish," said Chisaki. "If that's what you're offering, why should I join you? The Hero Killer, Muscular, Moonfish, even Deathstroke, all of these top game pieces at your disposal, and you lost them. You can't even manage a few crazy people, yet you want to build an army. You need direction and goals. And I have a plan." Chisaki lifted his hand, removing one of his white gloves. "I didn't come here because I wanted to join you," he said. "In order to bring my plans to fruition, I need money, but no one wants to invest in a small-time obsolete Yakuza. But your group has recognition behind the name. I want you to join me, make me your new leader, and I'll show you exactly how to use the right tools to accomplish your mission." "Leave," said Shigaraki. Immediately, Meijin leapt from her seat, taking her giant magnet in hand, running towards Chisaki. With a mighty heave, she used her magnetism to pull Chisaki towards her, ready to strike. In an instant, Magna's top half exploded, blood and gore raining down from around them. Toga screamed in fright, while Twice ran towards what was left of Magna's lifeless corpse, her giant magnet laying discarded next to her remains. "Just remember," said Chisaki, brushing himself off. "You made the first move. Ugh, I'm filthy now." His brushing turned vigorous as he tried to wipe the blood off his coat. Mr. Compress seized his chance and leapt into action, attempting to seal Chisaki away with his quirk. But something shining flew into his field of vision, striking him in the arm. As soon as his hand touched Chisaki's, his quirk seemed to no longer work. "Don't touch me," shouted Chisaki. Immediately, Mr. Compress' arm erupted in a geyser of blood, just as Magni did, causing him to rear back, shrieking in pain. The wall behind Chisaki exploded, revealing several beak-masked henchmen swarming around Chisaki. One of them, wearing a white cloak, was holding a revolver pistol. "Where did they come from?" shouted Twice, holding the injured Mr. Compress. "We weren't followed, I swear." "You're late," said Chisaki to the white-cloaked henchman. "It appears the test was successful, though," the henchman replied, producing a small firearm from his robes. Shigaraki looked at the pistol, and again at Mr. Compress, noticing a small syringe-like object sticking out of his arm. "What did you do to my comrade?" said Shigaraki. "The effects aren't permanent," Chisaki replied, continuing to scrub his arm. "Hard to be objective in this situation. Killing each other isn't productive. We'll cool our heads and try again later. I owe your side an arm." He turned and began to walk away, taking his henchmen with him. "Tamura, let me cut him," said Toga, producing a knife from her sleeve. "No," said Shigaraki. "Smart move," said Chisaki, tossing him a business card. "I don't want to rush you, but the sooner we talk, the better." "Let me go after them," said Twice. "I need to make them pay." "No," said Shigaraki. "Get Mr. Compress to a hospital." We need to make them bleed, said Toga, looking at the bloody corpse that was once Magni. Another time, said Shigaraki, picking up the business card. All in good time. Izuku sat nervously in his chair, sitting across the desk in Oliver Queen's office. He had escorted Izuku in quickly and sat him down, ready to begin their interview. Izuku was staunchly reminded that he had never been inside a real hero agency before, much less interviewed for one, and could feel his heart beating into his throat. "Can I get you anything?" said Queen. "Tea, soda." "No, thank you, Mr. Arrow," said Izuku. "I mean, Mr. Queen," he added quickly. "There's no need to be so formal," said Queen, laughing. "Relax, just call me Oliver." "Okay," said Izuku, feeling a little more at ease. "So Bruce told me that you were interested in work studies here," said Oliver. "I have to say, I'm surprised." "You are," said Izuku. "Of course," said Oliver. "You've already made quite a name for yourself in the hero world. Second place in the UA Sports Festival, taking down the hero killer, and not to mention Kamino Ward." He was counting off his fingers as he spoke. "With your resume, I figured any agency would be scrambling to have you work for them. So why come to my humble establishment?" "Well, I wasn't sure where to go," said Izuku. "And Bruce said I could do worse than you." He stopped short, eyes wide in horror. He hadn't meant to say that part. "Bruce said that," said Oliver, surprised. "Well, I didn't." Izuku stammered nervously. "That's the nicest thing he's ever said about me," said Oliver. He looked genuinely touched. "Well, in any case, you're hired, buddy. I am honored to be the one to officially welcome you into the Justice League." He stood immediately and started shaking Izuku's hand vigorously. "This is a Justice League agency," said Izuku. "The very first," said Oliver proudly. "Since All Might's retirement, the Justice League is looking to have more heroes on the ground to protect the little guys. All Might left some mighty big shoes to fill, and so they're sending anyone they can spare to form different agencies around the country. I volunteered to spearhead the effort." "How many more members of the Justice League have set up agencies?" said Izuku. "Are there any other Justice League members here with you?" asked Izuku. "A few, yes," said Oliver. "In fact, I was just on my way to a meeting. I think it would be a good idea to introduce you to the staff." Before he could protest, Oliver escorted Izuku out of the office and down a long hallway, passing by various training halls and technical rooms as he went along. "Are all of these people heroes?" asked Izuku, amazed. "Some of them," said Oliver, "but most of them are technical experts. There's a lot more to hero work than just smacking villains around." At the end of the hallway stood two large glass doors, similar to the ones Izuku passed through from the lobby. Oliver waved his security card and the doors slid open. Izuku looked at Oliver nervously, who just nodded for him to continue forward. Inside the room there were several people sitting at a large conference table, chattering among themselves. They looked up from their conversations as Izuku and Oliver made their way into the room. "It's about time you got here, Ollie," said a blonde-haired woman in a leather jacket. 5 more minutes and we would have left." "Well, I'm glad you decided to stay," said Oliver. "You can meet our newest recruit." "Great," said a tall, muscular hero in a red, sleeveless jumpsuit. "That's all we need is another teen brat running around the place." He nudged the girl next to him, who appeared no older than Izuku. She was wearing a gray hood and red, skin-tight spandex while absently twirling a small arrow bolt in her fingers. "Up yours, Harper," the girl replied. The man simply chuckled in response. Now, children," said the blonde-haired woman in a mock motherly tone. "Don't make me kick both your asses." "If you've all quite finished," said Oliver, "go ahead and introduce yourself." He gently pushed Izuku forward, who felt himself grow flush under the sudden pressure. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. Clearing his throat, he took a deep breath and tried again. "My name is izukumidoriya," he said, bowing politely. "First-year hero student for UA High School." There was silence as Izuku pulled himself up from his bow. The group before him seemed to be studying him carefully. "The kid who took down the hero killer," said the girl in the hood, finally breaking the silence. "The Bat's new sidekick," said the sleeveless man. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Izuku's going to be completing work studies with us," said Oliver. "Since when are we babysitters?" said the girl in the hood. "Why doesn't he work study with Batman?" "Obviously he feels as if Izuku could learn something working here," said the blonde-haired woman, standing up and walking over to Izuku. "Don't mind them, they've been cursed with bad attitudes. My name is Dinah, codename Black Canary. I've heard about you," said Izuku, perking up. "You're one of the birds of prey." "You've done your homework," said Black Canary, impressed. "Exactly what I would expect of Batman's new protege. The tall one over there is Roy Harper, codename Arsenal." She gestured over to the sleeveless man. "And the brat in the hood is Mia Dearden, codename Speedy." The girl in the hood didn't react, continuing to stare at Izuku while twirling the small arrow bolt. Izuku's going to be working with us after school, said Oliver. Batman has overseen his training thus far, but he still has a lot to learn about working the everyday beat. In the wake of All Might's retirement, it's up to us to protect the little guys out there. Whatever, said Arsenal, rolling his eyes and turning to Izuku. So you're the Bat's new sidekick. Big deal. What makes you think you can slug it out with us? Don't be rude, Roy, said Black Canary warningly. Good question, though, said Speedy. You took down the hero killer. Big deal. You were trained by Batman. Who cares? What makes you think you can keep up with us? Izuku didn't expect to receive this kind of animosity. Though he wasn't much younger than the two junior heroes there, the experience difference between them was palpable. He grew to realize that, despite everything Bruce had taught him, everything he learned at UA, and all the battles he had been in, he still didn't have a strong understanding about how to be a hero. They saw him as just another greenhorn, wet behind the ears. Then he remembered his last conversation with Kaken, when he appeared to him in his dream. Your training with Batman obviously squashed the wuss out of you. Just stop holding yourself back, and you better not lose again. This strengthened his resolve. Even if he had a quirk now, even if he was trained by Batman, he would still have people out there question his ability to be a hero, no matter what. He had to show them he had what it takes. Let me prove it to you, then, said Izuku. Let me show you I can keep up. I won't let you down. I won't hold back, and I won't lose. Oliver gave him an approving look. Speedy and Arsenal exchanged a glance at each other, looking unconvinced. Fine, said Arsenal finally. Just don't fall behind. I won't, said Izuku. You can count on me. Then your first assignment starts tomorrow, said Oliver. Have you heard of the Nighteye agency? As in Sir Nighteye, the pro hero. Izuku had seen him on television. He was supposed to be a genius-level tactician. His hero agency was small-time, housing only 2 official sidekicks. Regardless, his agency was responsible for taking down some high-level villains and was very well respected among hero agencies. The very same, said Oliver. The Justice League has been looking to form strategic partnerships with the local agencies, and considering Sir Nighteye has worked with the Justice League before, he was one of the first considered. He worked with the Justice League, said Izuku, surprised. Years ago, said Oliver, when he was All Might's former sidekick. Izuku had forgotten about that. All Might had worked with relatively few partners, especially in recent years, but he had taken a few sidekicks in his time, such as David Shield in America. Since All Might had once been a member of the Justice League, it is only safe to assume that Sir Nighteye was also a member. In their partnership, Nighteye was considered the brains behind All Might's brawn. In any case, we have been trying to establish a working relationship with Sir Nighteye, said Oliver, but our efforts have so far been in vain. But now that you're here, I think you would be the perfect liaison. I would like you to meet with him and convince him to partner with the agency. Me, said Izuku, stunned. But how would I help? If he worked with the Justice League before, why would he be reluctant to work with them again? He didn't leave the League on good terms, I'm afraid, said Oliver sadly. He was fiercely loyal to All Might, and resented Batman for his animosity towards him. But I'm Batman's student, said Izuku. I don't think he would be happy to see me. Perhaps, said Oliver, but there's something else that connects you to him, All Might. What do you mean? Said Izuku. Batman has told me how much All Might has grown to respect and admire you, said Oliver. Even though they don't talk anymore, Nighteye is head over heels for All Might. I'm confident that your shared connection to All Might would get you a meeting with him at least. You want me to ask All Might to introduce us, said Izuku. It couldn't hurt, said Oliver. You sure you want to trust him with this, said Arsenal. He could blow all the work we've done to try and get Nighteye on our side. Izuku's proven time and again that he can get results in any situation, said Oliver. Besides, interagency diplomacy is essential in hero work this day and age. Batman always preferred to work alone. Even as a founding member of the Justice League, he's never been more than a part-timer. I think it would be a good opportunity for you to learn how to work with others. If you say so, said Izuku. He was still unsure about this. Establishing a partnership between 2 agencies was not what he had in mind when starting his work studies. Oliver must have sensed his unease as he walked up to him and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Don't sweat it too much, kid, said Oliver. Talk to All Might. I'm sure he could help point you in the right direction. You want me to do what? All Might was surprised to hear that Izuku had wanted to speak with him. They hadn't had a moment to talk since they got back from Gotham, and he was eager to catch up. However, when Izuku had explained what he wanted of him, he almost wished he hadn't. I see, said All Might after Izuku's explanation. Oliver thinks I can help you get in touch with Nighteye. He leaned back, sighing. Please, sir, said Izuku. It would help me a great deal if you could arrange a meeting for me. I'm sorry, I have to refuse, said All Might bluntly. That's not to punish you. Personally, I was against the first years starting the work-study program so early on. Secondly, you still have a lot to learn about your quirk. I would recommend focusing on that before taking on extra hero work. And lastly, he paused, looking visibly uncomfortable. I just don't want to have to talk to the guy. It's been years since we spoke. I'd rather not open up old wounds. All Might, said Izuku. There's something I need to tell you. All Might listened with intense interest as Izuku regaled him of the dream he had with Kaken, about the things that he had said to him. Bruce has laid the groundwork for me, Izuku said. And you yourself have said that I'm worthy. I know I just inherited this quirk, but that's exactly why I need to do this work-study program. I need to get stronger so I feel worthy of this quirk. I know that Oliver can help me improve it, and maybe Nighteye can too. All Might sighed. I still can't introduce you, said All Might. Emphasis on there may be someone who can help in this situation. Third year Mirio Tagada. All Might would like to speak with you. Please go to the counseling office. Tagada stopped in his tracks as he heard his name called over the intercom. Crazy, he said laughing. He wants to talk to me. What could he want with you? Asked Hado. Are you in trouble or something? I don't know, said Tagada. But I'd gotta go see. He paused, waiting for his joke to land, but was left with blank stares from Hado and Amajiki. That was supremely unfunny, wasn't it? He said, laughing to himself. Thanks for meeting with us, Tagada, said All Might. He was sitting across Midoriya and Tagada, who were sitting next to each other on the couch before him. Sorry to call you up here out of the blue. No problem, said Tagada cheerfully. I'm just excited that you wanted to speak with me. You two have met before, right? Said All Might, turning to Izuku. Young Tagada here is doing his work study at Nighta's agency. Yup, said Tagada. I've been studying under Sir for a full year now. That means you're almost guaranteed to be his next sidekick when you graduate, said Izuku. He's taught me a lot, said Tagada. I hear that you've been training with Batman for over a year now too. It makes sense, considering how strong you are. I'm gonna get straight to the point here, said All Might. Young Midoriya is doing his work study with the Green Arrow at the Justice League's new agency. Midoriya has been tasked by the Arrow to establish a working relationship between Sir Nighteye's agency and his own. Wow, said Tagada, staring at Izuku in amazement. Talk about no pressure, right? But, man, first Batman, and now the Green Arrow. That's amazing. But still, why do you need me? I bet Sir would be ecstatic to work with the Justice League. You'd lose that bet, I'm afraid, said Izuku. The League has reached out to Nighteye on several occasions since starting an agency, but he has declined all attempts to meet with him. That's where you come in, said All Might. I get it, said Tagada. You want me to introduce you to Sir Nighteye. Exactly, said All Might. But why do you need to go through me? Asked Tagada. I always see him watching old video clips of you in his spare time. I'm sure he'd be really happy to hear from you. I can't exactly face him right now, said All Might. He was dead right. I ended up precisely where he warned me I'd be. He added, as if talking more to himself. Do you think Midoriya has a chance at convincing Nighteye? That's a toughie, said Tagada, turning to Izuku. But it would help if I knew what kind of hero you wanted to be. What kind? Said Izuku. This was something he hadn't thought about for a while. He thought back to his time before he entered UA, before he met Bruce. He had always wanted to be like All Might, saving people with a smile. But after what happened with Kaken, he had focused all of his efforts into becoming a hero so he could bring the villain to justice and avenge his fallen friend. Now that he had accomplished that, he wasn't really sure what kind of hero he wanted to be. He thought back to his training with Bruce, to his fight with the sludge villain, the hero killer, All for One, the Joker, and even Jason. And, as if in a flash, the words came to his mind and spilled from his mouth. I want to fight for those who can't fight for themselves, said Izuku. To show the world that anyone can be a hero, no matter their circumstances. Tagada sighed. Well, I have no reason to say no, then. He said cheerfully. You mean it, said Izuku excitedly. Sure, said Tagada. I don't know if Sir will agree, but I can at least introduce him to you. I think he'll at least like to meet you. Thank you, said Izuku. All Might smiled as he watched the discourse between the two students. They were like two sides of the same coin. Both were born with lofty goals and less than ideal circumstances, Midoriya with no quirk of his own, and Tagada with a nearly impossible to control quirk. Still, through hard work and determination, they have risen to the tops of their respective classes. He knew that if there was anyone in this school who was worthy to inherit his quirk, it was one of these two. All Might looked sadly at Midoriya. Though he denied him, in his heart he still felt as if Izuku was the right choice to inherit One for All. Perhaps he could give Tagada another chance, but something was still telling him to wait for Midoriya. Perhaps it was only that he was clinging to a false hope. but he still hoped that he would come around. Still, All Might couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting was the start of something big. It took an hour by train to get to the Nighteye agency from UA. The ride over had been mostly silent, but only on Izuku's part. Toga didn't have any trouble keeping up the conversation, even if he was the only one doing the talking. Izuku's stomach was tied up in knots. This was his first big assignment for the Justice League, and he was determined not to bungle it. However, establishing a partnership with a high-profile agency on his own was not something he thought he would be doing on his first day. He only hoped that Oliver's faith in him was not misplaced. His anxiety must have been displayed on his face as Toga clicked his fingers to snap him back to reality. "Hey man, take a deep breath," he said. "Try to loosen up. But not too loose," though he added quickly. "Sir is actually a pretty strict guy." "So I've heard," said Izuku. Sir Nighteye was famous for his demanding nature on those who served under him as well as himself. It was this philosophy that had afforded him great success in the hero community. In every interview or report Izuku had seen of him on television or the internet, he was reminded how fierce and intense his gaze was beneath his glasses, and how closely it reminded him of Bruce's own severe glare. "He may be strict," said Toga, "but there's a whole different side of him that most people don't get to see. You need to do one important thing at this meeting if you want to be acknowledged by him." He leaned forward, speaking dramatically. "You need to make him laugh." Izuku was dumbstruck. "I have to do what?" "You gotta make him laugh," Toga repeated. "He may be strict, but for some reason he really values humor." Ironic, right? "But if you want him to acknowledge you, then you need to make him laugh." Izuku had no idea how he was supposed to do that. Izuku wasn't exactly an expert when it came to humor. Perhaps after spending so much time with Bruce, his demeanor seemed to rub off on him. He couldn't even remember the last time he laughed. And the only thing close to humor he kept on him was the syringe of Joker serum antidote he had stored in his utility belt. He was still racking his brain as they exited the train and made their way towards the agency office. As they made their way upstairs, Izuku paused abruptly. "What's wrong, Midoriya?" asked Toga. Izuku pulled a small radio from his utility belt, placing a small earbud into his ear. After a few moments of listening, his suspicions were confirmed as he heard a faint scream coming from behind the doorway in the stairs above him. "Someone's in trouble," said Izuku, instinctively running past Toga and towards the doorway. "Midoriya, wait," said Toga, trying to catch up with him, but it was too late. Izuku had burst through the doorway, batarangs in hand, ready to face whatever threat lay before him. But instead of trouble, Izuku stared in disbelief as he saw two individuals, one of them a young woman who was strapped to a strange device. He realized now that she wasn't screaming, but laughing uncontrollably as several feathers attached to rods moved automatically across her body, tickling her immensely. Izuku was at a complete loss for words. "What the hell kind of place is this?" he thought. "Don't run off like that, Midoriya," said Toga, finally catching up with him. "Toga, what is going on?" said Izuku. "Oh, that's Bubble Girl, Sir's sidekick," said Toga nonchalantly, as if this happened on a regular basis. "I guess she didn't make him laugh." "Oh, that sucks." Standing in front of the laughing Bubble Girl, seemingly monitoring the bizarre torture, was a tall, skinny man in a white suit. Izuku recognized the man immediately as his intended target of interest, Sir Nighteye. He immediately drew his attention away from his sidekick and settled his glare on Izuku, who felt a chill run down his spine. He was starkly reminded of how rude it must have looked barging into his office with weapons drawn. This was off to a great start. "What is the meaning of this?" said Nighteye. "This is the kid I was telling you about," said Toga cheerfully. "Izuku Midoriya," Izuku said, bowing to introduce himself. "Yes, I know," said Nighteye. "And it's abundantly clear from your mannerisms that you picked up more of the Batman's impertinence than Mirio led me to believe. Most unfortunate." Izuku paused, unsure what to say next. It wasn't until this moment that he was able to take in the room around him. Before his training with Bruce, not even Izuku had as much All Might memorabilia as Sir Nighteye had. His office was a veritable shrine to All Might in all his splendor. Izuku saw he even had the never-released 10th anniversary poster. Nighteye was an even bigger All Might fanboy than his reputation preceded him to be. "Well," said Nighteye, "what have you to say?" Izuku cleared his throat awkwardly. "My apologies," he said, bowing again. "I heard a scream and acted instinctively. I am here too." "Yes, I know why you are here," said Nighteye. "I already told Oliver I wasn't interested in working with the Justice League anymore, and he thinks that sending a child in his stead will sway me." Nighteye inspected Izuku closely, the light reflecting off his glasses as he adjusted them. After a moment or so, "The boy from the Camino Ward incident," he said finally. "I had heard that Batman had been training another protege. All Might speaks very highly of you. Thank you, said Izuku. Don't thank me, said Nighteye. His praise is obviously misplaced. Ouch. Though Mirio as he helped Bubble Girl down from the tickle contraption. He's bombing his first impression. Sir, said Izuku, I simply want to explain myself. I know all about you, said Nighteye. The first quirkless student to ever be admitted into UA High, the boy who took second place at the sports festival, the boy who took down the hero killer, and, of course, the first ever known case of quirk appropriation. He adjusted his glasses again. Your resume is impressive for someone at your stage of his hero's journey. But so has every Robin before you, and every Robin there will be after you, if your mentor chooses to bring any more down that path of bloodshed. Sir, I'm not a Robin, said Izuku. Don't interrupt me while I'm speaking, Nighteye continued. You think you can simply waltz in here and think that simply because you represent the Justice League that will mean anything to me. I cut ties with that organization long ago. I have no time or patience for this. You can see yourself out. Nighteye turned to leave. Izuku had to think of something quick. He couldn't let this opportunity pass him by. Sir Nighteye, said Izuku, it's obvious that you admire All Might a great deal. Nighteye stopped, but didn't turn. Yes, he said. So, I have admired him most of my life as well, said Izuku. If there is something I can tell you about All Might that you don't know, will you agree to hear me out? Although his face remained passive, Izuku could almost see the light behind Night-Eye's glasses. If Izuku had pegged him right, a trivia contest of his idol was something that he couldn't pass up. You know something about him that I don't, said Nighteye. I hardly think that's possible. But very well, you have a deal. He looked over towards Toga and Bubble Girl. Will you two excuse us, please? You are aware of the River of Vinegar incident, said Izuku, waiting until after Toga and Bubble Girl had left. Not a very well-known story, said Nighteye, but I'm familiar with it. You'll have to do better than that. And you are aware of the fight with Toxic Chainsaw. Textbook, said Nighteye. Try harder. And you are aware of his training in America, said Izuku. Even the most basic of followers know this, said Nighteye, rolling his eyes. Are you trying to bore me? No, sir, said Izuku. To be honest, I was concerned about how much I should reveal. But I believe that I am correct in assuming you know about One for All. Nighteye paused. Yes, he said slowly. I am aware. If you would indulge me, sir, said Izuku. Can you elaborate on what you know? His quirk was passed down to him by his master, said Nighteye, and her master before her. This was done when All for One passed a stockpile quirk onto his brother, who in turn passed it on to his successor, who cultivated his quirk until it was time to pass it on to his own successor. Yes, sir, said Izuku, and you are aware how quirks came to be. Brainiac's exabytes, said Nighteye. I was there when he was destroyed. A time paradox caused by Lex Luthor allowed the stolen exabytes to be released into Earth's atmosphere 100 years in the past. What are you getting at, Midoriya? Please, sir, I'm getting to that, said Izuku. And you are aware how All for One acquired his quirk. Brainiac's failsafe, said Nighteye. A program designed to send any surviving pieces of himself throughout time and space to prevent total destruction. That is where All for One found and fused with one of his remains. That gave him the ability to manipulate the exabytes and others to acquire, modify, and transfer them to other hosts. Correct, sir, said Izuku. Except One for All. That is right, said Nighteye. It cannot be taken. It has to be passed freely by the current holder to the next host. But do you know why? Asked Izuku. Nighteye paused, contemplating Izuku. That is the way that it has always been, he said. It was a mutation caused by the quirk being passed down from host to host. No, sir, said Izuku. That is not the reason why. Nighteye started in surprise. What do you mean? The real reason why One for All can't be stolen, Izuku continued, is because Brainiac won't allow it. How could you possibly know that? Said Nighteye, shocked. Because, said Izuku, Brainiac told me. Izuku sat across the desk from Sir Nighteye, who had taken the moment to sit down, putting his head in his hands, collecting his thoughts. They had sat there in silence for at least 5 minutes while Izuku waited for him to compose himself. Explain, he said, finally breaking the silence. When All for One, Izuku paused, his voice catching in his throat, captured me, he passed a quirk onto me and brainwashed me. I'm aware, said Nighteye. Continue. Well, during that time, I could hear a voice in my head, said Izuku. I couldn't be sure, and at first I thought it was All for One. But it didn't sound like him. It sounded metallic, almost as if someone was speaking through a voice synthesizer. You're sure of this? Said Nighteye. Very sure, said Izuku. The voice told me about itself. It said that its true name was Brainiac of Krypton. I don't remember much of what it told me, but I do remember this. All for One did not just transfer exabytes to his brother. What do you mean? Said Nighteye. You said it was a stockpile quirk, Izuku continued. Exabytes have the ability to copy and store data, but the body can only hold so many before the body begins to metabolize itself. That's why many of the Namu experiments failed. Yes, I am aware of this as well, said Nighteye. The only reason All For One is able to hold so many quirks is because of the shard of Brainiac that he fused with. Wait, he said, his eyes widening as if it suddenly dawned on him. You're not saying All For One wanted to turn his brother to his ideals, said Izuku, and so he transferred a piece of Brainiac to him. No, said Nighteye, horrified. But what All For One didn't know, said Izuku, is that his brother wasn't quirkless at all, but the exabytes in his body lay dormant. When upon receiving the piece of Brainiac, the exabytes reactivated, and he discovered he was able to pass his quirk on to others. And when the One For All is passed, said Nighteye, so too is Brainiac, said Izuku. But you said that Brainiac wouldn't allow One For All to be stolen back, said Nighteye. Yes and no, said Izuku. Before All For One, Brainiac did not inhabit physical life forms. As hyper-advanced artificial intelligence, it has always been able to transfer itself to other cybernetic bodies when it has been destroyed. However, after fusing with All For One, it began to notice changes to its programming. It began to align itself with All For One's ideals. It wasn't satisfied with merely collecting data as it was before. It now had a new purpose in its new host. I see, said Nighteye. So it was influenced by All For One's desire for power. Exactly, said Izuku. And what I said is true. Brainiac won't allow One For All to be stolen. But not All For One's. I mean All Might's Brainiac. Of course, said Nighteye. It makes sense. If Brainiac was influenced by All For One, then one can assume that the piece that was transferred to his brother was influenced by him and the hosts that followed him. That's my assumption, said Izuku. A Brainiac with the ideals of justice. Who else have you told about this? Said Nighteye. No one, said Izuku. Not even Batman. But to be honest, I think he already knows. That would not surprise me, said Nighteye. Do you remember anything else? Even the slightest detail might be significant. No, said Izuku. All I know is what it told me. Whatever Brainiac is left in All Might has changed. It's like All Might told me once, an ironic part of life is that justice so often spawns from evil, finished Nighteye. He paused again, looking Izuku up and down. He told me that he had chosen you, he said finally, to inherit One For All. That is part of the reason why I agreed to let Mirio introduce you to me. He told me you weren't talking, said Izuku, surprised. We hadn't talked for years, said Nighteye. I was excited to hear from him again. Only to my surprise to hear that he had chosen another successor, and the student of Batman no less, he said, spitting out the last words as if they were poison to him. But I am pleased to see that you did not accept his offer, continued Nighteye. I have found a worthy successor in Mirio. Izuku looked towards the door that Tagada had walked through in surprise. So this is why he took on Tagada, he thought. He was grooming him to inherit One For All. If what you say about Brainiac is true, then the legacy of One For All must live on, said Nighteye. And I hope that All Might will see that Mirio is the right choice to continue that legacy. As for you, he added, looking Izuku over. He put his hand over his mouth, and Izuku could hear what he thought sounded like a small snort. You surprised me. That doesn't happen often. He held out his hand. Give me Oliver's contract. Izuku produced the contract from his backpack, watching as Nighteye signed it and stamped it with his seal. I had already decided that I would accept your offer when I heard Oliver was sending you, he said. Though you are definitely your mentor's student, you are not entirely lost to his corruption. But I wanted to see that for myself. He walked towards the door of his office and beckoned in Mirio and Bubble Girl. Sir, said Mirio cheerfully, how did it go? Our agency will be formally allying with the Justice League for the foreseeable future, said Nighteye, handing the document back to Izuku. All right, said Mirio. You did it, Midoriya. I guess you made him laugh after all. I look forward to working with all of you, said Izuku, bowing. Though he tried to hide it, he was grinning from ear to ear. He couldn't wait to bring the contract back to Oliver. You're working with the Justice League. Oliver had been ecstatic when Izuku had dropped off Sir Nightaye's contract back at the agency. After wringing his hand for several minutes, he directed Izuku to go home and get some sleep, as the real work was to begin the next day. Izuku had come back to realize that he was the only one in his class so far to get placed for the work studies. You're a credit to us all, said Ida, patting him on the shoulder. Not only that, but you'll be working with the Green Arrow and Sir Nighteye, said Zero. That's seriously cool, man. I wish I could find an agency, said Uraraka. But Gunhead's agency doesn't have enough internships or work-study students to qualify. Same with my internship agency, said Asui. Fourth Kind doesn't even accept work-study students, said Kirishima glumly. With all these restrictions, it's hard to find an agency who will take us, said Kaminari. Makes sense, though, said Ajiro. If something were to go wrong, the blame would fall on the pros. The students looked up to see Aizawa walking towards them. Only pros who are the real deal will take on rookies like yourselves, he said. Takoyami, he added. It looks like you've got an offer from one of them. Hawks has invited you to work with him in Kyushu. No way, said Shiro. He's the number 3 hero, said Kaminari. I respectfully accept this invitation, said Takoyami. All right, then, said Aizawa. I'll make sure you get the relevant paperwork later. Let me know when you are expected in Kyushu and I'll sign off on your absences. Kirishima, Uraraka, Asui, he added, turning to the 3 students. Amajiki wanted to speak with you, Kirishima, while Hado wanted to speak with you too. He gestured to Asui and Uraraka. You can meet up with them tomorrow or whatever. He yawned and walked towards his room without another word. Amajiki, said Kirishima. That's crazy. I wonder what he wants. I could be about the work-study program, said Asui. No way, said Uraraka excitedly. That would be too good to be true. Izuku's classmates began chattering excitedly among themselves. Izuku was absently sharpening a batarang from his utility belt. He wasn't sure what possessed him to tell Sir Nighteye about what Brainiac told him. He scarcely believed it himself when it had happened, and wondered if he had been dreaming the whole thing. But the voice of Brainiac was too vivid in his memory to simply dismiss it. He couldn't even bring himself to tell Bruce or All Might about it. Perhaps they already knew. But if they did, then why didn't they say anything when the first told him about One for All? And now, Sir Nighteye was looking at Mirio to be the next successor. Only a year ago he would have cut off his arm for a chance to inherit All Might's power. But now, the legacy of One for All appeared to Izuku to be nothing more than a burden. He already had a legacy to live up to of his own, and though he was strong, he didn't feel like his shoulders were broad enough to carry both. Regardless of what happened next, one thing was for sure, tomorrow was his first official day with the Justice League, and his first official day as a licensed hero. He couldn't wait to get started. Izuku tugged nervously at his bracers as he sat in his chair next to Oliver. He was wearing his newly upgraded hero uniform, provided by Bruce for his first day. Oliver and Black Canary had accompanied Izuku to Sir Nightaye's agency the following day after Izuku had met with him, ready to begin their partnership in earnest. Across the table from them, looking over case files, was Sir Nighteye, Bubble Girl, and Tagata. Izuku couldn't suppress the butterflies in his stomach. This was the first time he would actually be doing authorized hero work, and in broad daylight. He was much more adept at working in the shadows, under cover of night. He felt more comfortable there. Bruce had taught him that once the darkness is your ally, the criminals can no longer truly hide. Oliver, on the other hand, was much more open and flamboyant with his work. He wasn't as feared as Batman, but as a hero he was equally as respected. It was said that his archery skills were so impressive that he could pin a wasp to the wall by its stinger at 500 yards, without killing it. This was all the more impressive as he was one of the few heroes in the industry who openly and proudly proclaimed he was without a quirk. Like Bruce, everything that made him who he was he obtained through sheer determination and hard work. It was one of the reasons Izuku respected him so much. I understand you want to work with us on the Shy Hasekai investigation, said Nighteye. However, why the Justice League wants to assist in taking down a small-time Yakuza gang escapes me. I remember that you were all too focused on global scales to bother yourselves with such trivial matters. We missed you too, Sasaki, said Oliver. Sure, we've taken down some big guns, but you should know by now that no criminal organization is too small to deserve a beatdown from the Justice League. We've been keeping an eye on all the Yakuza gangs for a while, said Black Canary. They've been lying dormant for years, and now that All Might has retired, we expect they may try to use the power gap to gain a foothold back into the criminal limelight. But so far, only the Hasekai gang has made any kind of movement. Yes, said Nighteye, placing a profile photo of a man in a beak like Dr. Mask. Kai Chisaki, the second in command of the Hasekai. He's been acting strangely. He's been gathering the various Yakuza groups together for reasons currently unknown to us. He also has recently made contact with the League of Villains, though we don't have solid proof linking him to anything yet. So we split into groups and hit the streets, said Oliver. Exactly, said Nighteye. Bubble Girl and I will form one group, you and Black Canary will form another, and lastly, Mirio and Midoriya will patrol together. Sounds like a plan, said Oliver, turning to Midoriya. Be careful if you run into him, kid. He may not look like it, but he's dangerous, and we don't want to tip him off that we're onto him just yet. Hey, look, heroes. Isn't that the guy from the UA Sports Festival? No, wait, it's the guy who took down the hero killer. Are you serious? Maybe we should get his autograph. Izuku felt himself blushing under the attention he was receiving. He and Mirio had only begun their patrol when he started noticing the whispers all around him. Izuku was still unused to the notoriety he received as a hero, and now more than ever wished he could go back to working under the radar. You look tense, Midoriya, said Toga. Loosen up. From what Green Arrow tells me, you've got a ton of experience already doing hero work. You should be a pro at this. It's not that, said Izuku. I just forget how easily I'm recognized when going out in public. Well, I can't say I blame you, said Toga. I mean, I was looking forward to meeting you ever since I saw you on the news after the Hasu incident. It's not every day a high school student takes down a major villain. It wasn't as easy as they made it out to be, said Izuku. I was almost killed. Crazy, said Toga. Well, try not to worry. Sir and Green Arrow are the ones tailing the target, so don't expect this to be very eventful. Oh, he added suddenly. That reminds me, we haven't told each other our hero names. Deku, said Izuku. Deku, repeated Toga, bemused. As in useless. It's a long story, said Izuku. Well, I'm Lemillion, said Toga. It's my dream to one day save 1 million people. I know I can't save everyone, but I can at least shoot for saving 1 million. An admirable goal, said Izuku. Thanks, said Toga. We better continue our patrol. Don't let your guard down, Deku. You got it. Izuku stopped abruptly. Something bumped hard into his hip, startling him. Looking down, he saw a small girl with gray-white hair with a small horn protruding from the right side of her upper forehead. She was wearing what looked to be a shabby nightgown with white bandages up and down both her arms and legs. Are you all right? Said Izuku, crouching and extending his hand to help her up. The girl gasped, recoiling as if she was afraid he would strike her. Izuku ran a quick scan with his cowl vision. Her heartbeat and blood pressure was elevated, and she was trembling profusely. It was obvious she was frightened beyond belief. What's more, the cowl picked up scar tissue beneath the bandages on her arms and legs, and several other points on her body. It didn't take a detective to guess that this girl was in trouble. You shouldn't run off like that. Izuku looked up towards the voice from the alleyway the girl had just appeared from. Izuku gasped inwardly as Chisaki walked towards them. We don't want to make trouble for the heroes. The girl began trembling even harder, all the blood draining from her face at the appearance of Chisaki. Izuku stood swiftly and put himself between her and Chisaki, who blinked in surprise but said nothing. I hope you'll forgive my daughter, hero, he said in a cheerful demeanor. I just don't know what to do with her, always playing rough and bumping into things. I'm so sorry about that, said Toga. It was our fault, too. Izuku was glad he was wearing his cowl and hood. Chisaki surprised him, and if he had noticed that, it would have risked Oliver and Sir Nightaye's operation. I know that mask, said Toga, trying to defuse the situation. You're from the Hasekai, right? You guys are pretty famous around here. Please don't mind the mask, it keeps out the filth, said Chisaki, putting special emphasis on the last word. I don't think I've seen you around here before. What agency are you a part of? Izuku swallowed. They couldn't risk him finding out who they were or where they were from, or it could blow the investigation. They had to exit the situation quickly. We're still students, said Toga, as if he was thinking the same thing. Still too early to claim membership to any agency. We're using our internships to gain experience, and we still have to finish our patrol. Let's go, partner. He patted Izuku on the shoulder, but stopped when Izuku didn't move. The girl had wrapped her arms around his leg and was holding on tightly. Every instinct he had was telling him to pick up this girl and run to the nearest police station. But that would destroy any chance Oliver and Sir Nighteye had at investigating Chisaki further. He had to play this smart. She seems pretty frightened, said Izuku. A response to being scolded, replied Chisaki coolly. Not to mention she's covered in bandages, Izuku continued. All this from playing rough. Yuri's an exceptionally clumsy girl, said Chisaki. I wonder, said Izuku. She is frightened and won't let go of me. Does that seem normal to you? It's dangerous to assume what's normal in one's own family, growled Chisaki. That's right, we're all different, said Toga. What is he doing? He thought internally. If we spook him now, it'll only make it harder for us to follow his activities. We can't make him suspicious, we have to let this go. Not good enough, said Izuku bluntly. What are you doing to her? Toga stared in surprise at Izuku's abruptness. Chisaki's eyes grew dark, but then he sighed. You heroes really know how to pick up on the smallest things, don't you? He said. This situation is embarrassing, so I would prefer if we discuss this where we won't be overheard. Chisaki turned and began walking back down the dark alleyway. Toga and Izuku followed, with the latter keeping a comforting hand on Eri. Hard to admit that you can't control your own child, said Chisaki. But lately Eri defies me no matter what I try. Parenting can be tough, said Toga. Yes, said Chisaki, fidgeting with one of his white gloves, so determined to do whatever they want that sometimes they just don't listen. Eri seemed to have noticed this motion and quickly ran back towards Chisaki. Oh, good, said Chisaki. Done with your temper tantrum. Are you okay, Eri? Asked Izuku. She's always like this, said Chisaki. Sorry to involve you in our family drama. I'm sure you have better things to be doing. Good luck with your internships. Izuku wanted to go after her, but the motion he made with his glove was a clear indication that Chisaki was ready to get violent. If they pushed a confrontation now, he would be even harder to catch. He had to let her go for now. That was too close, said Toga. What were you doing? I got what I needed, said Izuku. What do you mean? It would have been worse if we had just left, said Izuku. What kind of a hero would leave a frightened child to someone who claimed to be her father without any proof? If we just took his word for it, that would have made him more suspicious. She had to go with him on her own. I see, said Toga. What's more, while he was talking, I was gathering all I needed on him, said Izuku. What? Said Toga, surprised. In what way? Izuku pulled up his gauntlet computer, showing several images of Eri and Chisaki taken from his cowl vision. I was able to get a reading on both their vitals, said Izuku. When he said she was his daughter, his heartbeat clearly indicated he was lying. Take a look at this, he gestured to his gauntlet, which was displaying several screens, including images and audio of Chisaki as they continued to walk down the alleyway. Is this live? Said Toga. Live and in concert, said Izuku. How did you do that? Nanotech, said Izuku. Taken from a villain named Virgil Adams and reverse engineered by Batman. While we were talking, I planted a small device on her that can break apart and transform autonomously, blending in with its surroundings, invisible to the naked eye, but acts as audio and visual receptors to anyone with the right frequencies. That's amazing, said Toga. We can see everything Chisaki does. Is this legal? Chisaki lying about his relation to Eri coupled with her injuries and frightened demeanor, said Izuku. That's enough probable cause for any judge. We got him, said Toga excitedly. Let's get this back to Sir in the Arrow. The young people today are sicker than ever, said Chisaki. Kurono, prepare the bath. I need to scrub the filth off me. Chisaki had taken Eri back to the Hasekai stronghold. Her escape had left him in a sour mood, compounded by the fact that she bumped into two heroes nonetheless. The one in the black armor was too bold, asking questions no sane person would dare ask a mob boss. Not in their prime years, anyway. It was maddening. They were all infected with hero syndrome. But Chisaki would change that soon enough. And sorry boss, said the henchman in charge of watching Eri. I swear, I only took my eyes off her for a second and she made a break for it. All it took was a touch from Overhaul's fingertips to reduce this pathetic worm to a bloodstain on the wall. He hated getting his hands dirty, but this was an offense that could not stand. It required an example. Clean that up, he snapped at Kurono. Eri shut her eyes as tight as she could, but she could hear the sickening splat of the poor guard as he met his demise at the hands of her captor. Once again, someone was hurt because of her. Chisaki was angry and killed someone else because she ran away. He would have done the same to those nice heroes if she hadn't returned when she did. She was always getting people hurt. You really need to stop running away, Eri, said Chisaki. She opened her eyes, but immediately wished that she hadn't. They were back in the room. The horrible room where he hurt her. She could feel tears streaming down her eyes as she stared at the frightening instruments around the surgical chair in the middle, where all her suffering took place. You know you're the key to my plans, Chisaki continued. And you also know how much I hate to get my hands dirty. It's in your best interest, really. So be a good girl from now on, and do as I say. Boss, a small gremlin-like henchman dressed in a black jumpsuit with a white beak mask hobbled over towards Chisaki, holding a cell phone for him to grab. It's Shigaraki. He has an answer for you. Are you some sort of a danger magnet, kid? Said Green Arrow. Izuku and Toga caught up with him and Sir Nighteye after their encounter with Chisaki. I would rather not be the person Batman breaks his no-killing rule for if something happened to you. Sorry, said Toga. It was a total accident. I should take responsibility, said Sir Nighteye. I should have used foresight on you. Then you would have been prepared for the encounter. In any case, I'm glad nothing happened to you, said Green Arrow. Things could have gone a lot worse than they did. But sir, we also got lucky, said Toga excitedly. Thanks to Midoriya, we have new intel to give you. Izuku filled Sir Nighteye and Green Arrow in on all the data he had gathered and was currently gathering on Chisaki. The transmitter he had placed on Eri had unfortunately stopped transmitting, but that led him to believe that they were deep underground somewhere, or in a bunker designed to block radio waves and other transmissions. This must mean their stronghold is more heavily fortified than we thought, said Sir Nighteye. And then there's this daughter. I don't think she was his daughter, said Izuku. He was lying when we pressed him about it. She was covered in bandages and looked terrified. It was clear she was asking for help. Don't be so hasty, said Sir Nighteye. We can't move too quickly or Chisaki will be much more likely to escape. We've asked other agencies to team up with us on this case, said Green Arrow. We're making preparations to face him as we speak. Don't worry, kid, he added, placing a comforting hand on Izuku's shoulder. We'll stop him. If you two are through, said Sir Nighteye coarsely, I think you've done enough for today. Green Arrow and I will take it from here. Wait, said Izuku. Isn't there more we can do? I told you not to be hasty, said Sir Nighteye. Your mentor may not have taught you this, but you can't just swoop in where you want when you want. While you're on this investigation, you are to do things by the book, not like some half-cocked vigilante. Without another word, he turned on his heel and walked off. Don't take it personally, kid, said Green Arrow. He hasn't removed that stick since he was in the Justice League. But he's right. We have to do this right. Heroes have been on shaky ground with the public ever since the Camino incident, and we can't afford any more bad press. You kids have done great work today. Go home and get some rest. We'll contact you when it's time for the next move. Throughout the next few days, Izuku couldn't keep his mind off of Chisaki and the poor little girl, Eri. It burned a hole in his stomach that he couldn't do something for her right then and there. Batman would have already had everything he needed, and would have taken him down in an instant. A stark reminder about how much he had to learn, and how different the professional hero world was compared to the Dark Knights. What's more, Izuku was troubled by something. All Might had still not given up One for All. Even after Izuku's refusal of the power, and a ready and worthy successor waiting in the wings, All Might stubbornly held on to the power he could no longer use. In the wake of his retirement, and in light of what Brainiac had told him during his incarceration by All for One, the need for a successor was more crucial than ever. Why didn't he tell him about Toga? Why hadn't he passed it on to him yet? Was it to spite Nighteye? Was he ashamed? Or was he still hoping that Izuku would change his mind and take up his mantle? He had to talk to him about this. All Might coughed slightly as he jogged through the forest path outside UA. He was careful not to stray too far from the campus, as he was a sitting duck now without his power. However, after his trip to the watchtower, Superman had given him a watch that sent out a subsonic frequency to summon him should he ever need help. He was touched by the gesture, but he still felt humbled over the fact that he used to be on par with Superman when it came to his strength. Still, he supposed he shouldn't be. A loud explosion erupted from behind him. Turning sharply, All Might saw a small figure rapidly approaching him. Squinting in the evening sunlight, it turned out to be young Midoriya is here, said All Might, half surprised and half amused. Izuku landed deftly a few meters away from him. How did you find me? Why haven't you passed on One for All? Asked Izuku. All Might was silent, looking away from Izuku. You were so willing to give it to me, said Izuku. Even before I got this quirk. Nighteye has practically groomed Toga to inherit the quirk, and you still won't pass it on. Why? I have my reasons, he said finally. You knew what I was walking into with Nighteye, said Izuku. That's why you didn't want me to go to him. You knew he wanted you to pass it on to Toga, and not me. But what I don't understand is why you haven't done it. He's worthy. So are you, said All Might. Is that why? Said Izuku. Did you want to make up for what you said to me back on that rooftop? All Might, I've already made peace with that. But what I don't get is Izuku paused. What? Said All Might. Is what Brainiac told me, said Izuku. What? Said All Might, taken aback. Back then, in Camino Ward, said Izuku. When All for One probed into my mind, I spoke to him, All Might. I spoke with Brainiac. What did he say? Said All Might. He told me about the piece of himself that resides within One for All, Izuku explained. He told me how it refuses to return to him, how it has been corrupted by our sense of justice, and now fights against him. All Might was shocked. His mind traveled back to his time in the Justice League, when he had come face to face with Brainiac himself during their final battle. Clark, Bruce, Diana, and several other heroes and villains alike had fought in the very depths of space to keep him from coming to Earth, only to finally push him back to his stronghold within a small asteroid. He had told All Might about the piece of himself that remained inside of him, and how it was destiny that it was led back to him. To be reclaimed, he was unable to. It was this reason that the heroes were able to turn the tide against the robotic villain and bring him down. Somehow, the piece inside him had fought back and damaged the original and allowed him to be defeated. I'm sorry you had to find out that way, said All Might. I'm sorry that you were taken at all. He took you to get to me. That doesn't matter, said Izuku. I want to know why you haven't passed it on yet. The world needs a hero like you now more than ever. Why can't you give it up? Because Docs told me not to, said All Might. Izuku paused, confused. Who? Quirrell Docs, said All Might. The piece of brainiac that resides within me. That is his name. He has a name, said Izuku. Yes, said All Might. It's a long story. I've got time, said Izuku. Tell me everything. You owe me that much. All Might let out a sigh. All right, he said. But you may regret this. I won't, said Izuku. Well, many years ago, after my master had passed one for all to me, said All Might. She had passed away during her battle with All for One. I was grieving over the loss of my mentor when I heard a voice inside my head. I thought I was going crazy, but it was as clear as day. He told me his name was Quirrell Docs, and that he was the progenitor of my quirk. He comforted me in my grief, and told me what I needed to do to get stronger, to go to America to seek out the Justice League. That's when you met Batman, said Izuku. Pretty much, said All Might. He was the one who recommended me. I couldn't understand why, since we didn't particularly like each other, but I was accepted without hesitation. Those were some of my best years. I learned so much under the League's guidance, and when I finally returned to Japan for my debut, I used my training to quickly become the #1 hero. Though I was no longer a full-time member, I still helped the League here and there from time to time. That's when I met Nighteye, All Might continued. He had always been a big fan of mine, but it was my policy not to accept sidekicks. However, eventually I relented, and let him be my #2. We worked well together, and when the threat of Brainiac came to Earth, the League called upon us and we acted without hesitation. It was during that fight I learned about the true nature of Quirrell Docs. Your Brainiac, said Izuku. Yes, said All Might. Since he was created by the scientists on Krypton, Brainiac had already consumed and digitized thousands of worlds. One such world was a planet called Kalu. Quirrell Docs was a young boy living on the planet at the time, and when he was digitized with the rest of his people, his consciousness somehow remained intact, laying dormant inside Brainiac's codes. My guess is because his intellect was significantly higher than that of the average Kaluan. The paradox that was created by Brainiac's destruction caused the piece that contained his consciousness to be sent back in time, where it was recovered and merged with All for One. When he forced the stockpile quirk onto his brother, the small piece that was Doc's transferred to him and had a woke eye. It was through him that his brother was able to learn from him and taught him how to use his quirk, said All Might. And every time he was passed down through the transference of One for All, the quirk became stronger, and Docs guided each and every one of its users. But you never told Nighteye, said Izuku. He knew how All for One works, but you never told him about Quirrell Docs. He didn't need to know, said All Might. But after the battle with Brainiac, he and I officially resigned from the Justice League to focus on destroying All for One. And our partnership dissolved after my fight with him 6 years ago because of my injury. We had different values. What do you mean? Asked Izuku. He wanted me to retire, said All Might. He warned me that if I continued fighting, my injury would get worse, and the world would soon find out the truth, that the symbol of peace was secretly broken. What's more, he used his foresight on me. He foresaw my death. How long? Izuku asked. How long do you have? Probably a year, said All Might. Maybe 2. But eventually, I'll die by the hands of some villain. Izuku stared silently at All Might, a loss for words. Ever since he knew about his injury, he knew that All Might couldn't keep up the hero fight forever. And hearing it straight from his former hero's mouth hit him harder than he expected it to. What's more, he still hadn't passed on One for All, and he was running out of time. Why won't he let you pass on your quirk? Said Izuku. If you die, One for All will die with you. I don't know, said All Might. But he says it's not the right time yet. Then you better stay alive, said Izuku. Not just to pass on your quirk, but so you can be there to teach them to use it. Even if you're not who you used to be, you're still the symbol of peace. The world has to see that you have chosen your successor for them to accept him. You can't do that if you're dead. His foresight has never been wrong, said All Might. That doesn't matter, said Izuku. Jason was once dead as well. The same with Kaken. If there's one thing that I've learned, it is that nothing, not even death, is set in stone. Young Midoriya, said All Might. When I heard about my death, I accepted that as my fate. To be honest, when I fought him at Kamino Ward, I thought my death would be caused by All for One. It would have been the perfect irony. But you were there, you and Bruce. I haven't realized just how much the time I've spent with you two has affected me. So I won't give up. Just like I promised you and your mother, I'll keep on living to guide you and my successor, whoever that may be. I'll be there too, said Izuku. I'll help you fight fate. Uraraka and Asui brushed themselves off, getting clear of the debris around them. They had responded to an emergency call while on patrol with Nighteye, who had taken them under her wing and recommended a work-study position with her at the Ryukyu the Dragoon Heroes Agency. Two perpetrators with enlargement quirks were making a wreck of the city as they fought each other, but Nighteye, Uraraka, and Asui made quick work of them, and luckily there were no casualties. "You guys did great," said Nighteye happily. "Your teamwork is really incredible. Were you nervous at all?" "A little," Uraraka admitted. "I'm just glad I was able to keep calm," said Asui. "Don't sell yourself short," said Ryukyu. "You're both great at this." "I agree." The four heroes turned to the sound of the voice behind them. A woman was approaching them. She wore a black one-piece jumpsuit with fishnet stockings covered by knee-high boots, a leather jacket covering her otherwise exposed shoulders, and vibrant blonde hair. Though her Japanese was excellent, she spoke with an American accent. "Good to see you again, Ryukyu," said the woman. "Likewise," said Ryukyu, bowing cordially. "Everyone, this is Black Canary, a hero from the Justice League." Uraraka and Asui did a double take. Nighteye hovered around Canary, chatting excitedly about everything she heard about her. "You're the hero Deku's working with," said Uraraka, staring in awe. "That's right," said Canary. "Midoriya told me a lot about you too, which is why I think you will be perfect to join our operation." "Operation?" said Asui. Ryukyu nodded. "The Arrow and the Nighteye agency have partnered up on a special assignment, and have asked several other agencies to join them." "What's the assignment?" asked Uraraka. "A joint investigation and siege of the designated villain group, Shei Hasekai," said Canary. "We have reason to believe that they are working with the League of Villains, and they could be our chance to lead us to them." "The League is back," said Uraraka, alarmed. "Possibly," said Canary. "We're monitoring the situation closely. For now, keep trading. We'll be in touch shortly." "You made me walk in circles underground for 30 minutes like an ant," said Shigaraki. "I hope you're not wasting my time." Shigaraki and Chisaki sat across from each other in a conference room, a small coffee table between them. Shigaraki had come alone, and he was surrounded by several of Chisaki's henchmen. Despite this, Shigaraki made no efforts to hide his displeasure as he sat across from his foe. The man had waltzed into his base and murdered one of his closest comrades and wounded another, all the while rudely asserting himself as his master's replacement. It was all he could do to restrain himself from disintegrating Chisaki on the spot. However, his master had always warned him about hastily dispatching your foes. "Even enemies have their uses," he had always said. Chisaki had called him here to talk, so Shigaraki would listen to what he had to say. "For now, it is necessary to keep away the prying eyes of the law. And worse, heroes," said Chisaki. "We never know what our guests' intentions are. Even if you manage to kill both of us, it is unlikely you would find your way out of this base before you were found and destroyed." It was as if Chisaki had read Shigaraki's mind, but the latter stayed silent. "Let's get down to business," said the small gremlin sitting next to Chisaki. He was the small, beak-masked henchman who had accompanied his master with him to the League's hideout that night. He was fiddling with a large wad of 1,000-yen bills as he watched Shigaraki. "You said you would join us if your conditions were met, and we're here to discuss those conditions." "Don't flatter yourself," said Shigaraki, placing his foot on the coffee table in front of him. "The only reason you want us to join you is because you want the prestige of the League of Villains backing you up. We are looking to build up our strength of numbers. As I can see from my side, our needs coincide." Chisaki glared at Shigaraki's foot on the table. "Put your foot down," he said. "You'll get the table dirty." "Put your foot down, please," Shigaraki corrected mockingly. "You really should learn to be more polite, considering you want my help." "What are your conditions?" said Chisaki. "A joint partnership," said Shigaraki. "We won't put ourselves under you. We'll move however we want." "Is that all?" said Chisaki. "There is one more thing," said Shigaraki. "Tell me your plan." "What?" said Chisaki. "That's a reasonable condition," said Shigaraki. "I want to consider whether or not there's merit in lending you our name." "For that matter," Shigaraki reached his hand into his jacket. In a flash, the man in a white robe standing behind him placed a gun to his head. "That's quite far enough," said the white-robed henchman. "Who do you think you are?" said the gremlin sitting next to Chisaki. "Who do you think you are?" Shigaraki shot back. "You murdered one of my top allies while you only lost a small-time punk from your side. Not exactly an equal trade, was it? Not to mention the loss of Compress Arm. If you think that we're taking anything less than an equal partnership in this after that performance, you are sorely mistaken." "Enough," said Chisaki. "Kurono, Mimic, stand down." Immediately the two henchmen backed off. Chisaki gestured to Shigaraki to continue with what he was saying. "Tell me the details of your plan," said Shigaraki, retrieving an object from his jacket. It was one of the small capsules that was shot at his comrades during the scuffle at the warehouse, the one that restricted his quirk. and what it has to do with this. Kirishima was taken aback by the scenery around him as he walked along the glitzy shopping district of downtown Asuha City. He was walking next to an extremely large, egg-shaped man in a yellow jumpsuit, the professional hero Fatgum, as he munched on a tray of fried octopus. "I'm starvin'," said Fatgum as he ate. Kirishima knew that Fatgum had a stockpile-type quirk that required him to ingest large amounts of calories. This fat absorption allowed him to take extreme amounts of punishment without sustaining any harm. This feature allowed him to store the kinetic energy from attacks into his fat cells, which he could then release at a time of his choosing. This made him a formidable opponent to any villain, which is why he was so popular in Asuha. Following behind the two of them was Amajiki. When Kirishima had discovered that he was working with Fatgum, Kirishima cornered him at school and pestered him relentlessly until he agreed to introduce him to the hero. In truth, Kirishima felt a little bad about it, considering how Amajiki had a weak constitution, and his persistence had frightened his poor senpai terribly, but he couldn't let an opportunity like this pass him up. "Punks around here have been getting into a lot of fights lately," said Fatgum, letting out a large belch after polishing off the fried octopus. In response, the hero agencies have been looking for a lot of fighting-type interns, so you're a perfect fit for this, Red Riot. "Thank you," said Kirishima enthusiastically. "I am very excited and thankful for the opportunity to work with you." "Amajiki's pretty great too," said Fatgum. "If only he'd toughen up a bit. I've been trying to get him out of his shell, but it's been slow going." "It's been torture," mumbled Amajiki glumly. "I'm convinced he only scouted me to torment me." "Hey, Fat!" shouted one of the vendors to Fatgum. "Eat here." Fatgum waved at the vendor, promising to eat there tomorrow. In Asuha, having Fatgum appear at your restaurant was as good as an official endorsement, so most vendors offered him free food just for standing near them. "What made you want to do work studies here, anyway?" Amajiki asked Kirishima. "Well," Kirishima paused. "A lot has happened to our class recently, and it feels like the gap between me and my classmates is getting wider. I need to get stronger or I'm going to get left behind." Fatgum stopped abruptly at the sound of shouting behind them. "Speak of the devil," he said. "Sounds like a fight." Several men began running down the street towards them away from the scene. The man who was chasing them was shouting that they were selling illegal products by his store. Fatgum stepped into the street to intercept them, causing them to ram into him. His fat cells began to envelop them, causing them to sink into his body, one of the effects of his quirk. One of the criminals was able to wiggle out of his grasp using his own quirk, but was stopped by a massive octopus tentacles protruding from Amajiki's fingers. He used them to pull the perpetrator towards him. His other hand morphed into a giant clam shell, which he used to bash the criminal senseless. Kirishima stared in amazement. Amajiki may be easily frightened, but was able to place his fear aside in serious situations to get the job done. His quirk, Manifest, which allowed him to assume various forms of animals he has recently eaten, was extremely powerful. Kirishima could see why he was listed as one of the big three. Fatgum and Amajiki held the criminals until the police arrived after a short while. Kirishima noticed a flash of light from the audience. Looking towards the source, he could see a disheveled man in the crowd holding a firearm. Fatgum must have noticed it too and tried to step in between the two students, but he wasn't fast enough. The gun fired, its payload striking Amajiki in the arm. Kirishima instinctively stepped in front of Amajiki and was struck in the head with a second shot. His quirk activated in time to deflect the shot, causing the perpetrator to panic and run. Kirishima's chance had come. He ran after the gunman quickly while Fatgum checked on Amajiki. He followed the gunman down an alleyway, where they quickly reached a dead end. Desperate, the criminal activated his quirk, producing several blades from his arm, ripping his coat and lunging them towards Kirishima. The blades did not harm his hardened skin, and he was able to land a heavy punch to the man's face, knocking him to the ground. "Don't resist," said Kirishima. "Give up and I won't hurt you." The man didn't move from the ground, but began heaving with heavy sobs. "It's not fair," said the man. "Your quirk is so strong and mine is so weak." Kirishima didn't quite know how to respond. Instead, he walked towards the man and helped him up. "Don't cry, you're embarrassing yourself," he said. "I wanted to get strong, so I hung out with strong guys," the man mumbled. "I want to be strong, but I haven't gotten stronger." "What are you talking about?" said Kirishima. The man's attitude changed. He stopped crying, his eyes growing darker. "Someone like you couldn't possibly know what I've been through. I will get stronger," he said sharply. Quicker than Kirishima could react, he lifted a red syringe and injected its contents into his exposed neck. He began to shriek in pain, hitting the floor hard while his body began convulsing. "What the hell is happening?" shouted Kirishima. What did you do? Suddenly, the man's body began to grow at an alarming rate. His skin tore as his muscles grew faster than they could handle. Long blades began protruding from his appendages. His eyes began to glow a deadly red, and his voice grew deeper. When the transformation had stopped, he was over 7 feet tall. His arms and legs were disproportionately shaped, with blades sticking out of them at odd angles. He no longer looked human. Kirishima was out of his depth. His mind flashed back to the Namu at the USJ. The civilians surrounding them screamed and began to run for cover. He had to protect them from this thing. Fatgum and Amajiki were nowhere to be found, and he had to hold this creature off just long enough for them to get to him. The creature roared fiercely, causing the windows to shatter around them. It charged at Kirishima, who instinctively planted his feet, guarding himself. The creature swatted him like a fly, sending him crashing into a building behind him. He felt blood trickling down his arm, and he noticed that the blades on the creature's arm had managed to cut through his hardening quirk. He lunged from the wreckage as the creature put its fist in the creator he used to occupy, missing him narrowly. Kirishima continued to dodge the creature's attacks, but he was beginning to lose steam. His mind flashed back to All Might's last stand at Kamino. He felt a sudden rush of courage come to his heart. Mustering all the strength he could, he stretched his quirk to the peak of his ability, the special move he had been practicing for years, Red Riot Unbreakable. Every skin cell on his body became as hard as diamond. He could only hold this form for 30 to 40 seconds, so he had to make this count. Instead of relying on a few tricks, he would bulldoze straight through to this enemy, just as All Might did. He rushed the monster at full speed, which charged him likewise. At the last moment, he lunged out of the way of the monster's grasping hand and plowed his fist into its unprotected eyes. The monster lunged backwards, grabbing its face in pain. Kirishima seized his chance and attacked the monster's leg, which was disproportionately smaller and deformed compared to his other one. The monster fell to the floor in a great heap, and Kirishima, using every ounce of strength he had, jumped towards the creature to finish it off when its giant hand grabbed him around the waist. Kirishima struggled as the creature began to squeeze him tightly. His unbreakable form wouldn't last much longer, and as soon as it failed he would be done for. He had to think quickly. He heard something fly past his head, landing with a small thud on the creature. It turned away from Kirishima to investigate the noise when they both discovered an arrow sticking from its arm. A small device on the arrow shaft began to beep at a rapid pace before exploding in the monster's face. Kirishima saw the owner of the arrow, a tall man in a green hood, standing behind him, his next round drawn and ready to fire. "I'll distract him," said the man. "Stick him with this." He threw a small syringe at Kirishima, who caught it effortlessly. As the man continued to fire arrows at the creature, Kirishima seized his chance and stabbed the syringe into the creature's hand that was still holding him. The creature dropped him and began to swoon. Immediately, he began to shrink. The knives protruding from his body were starting to retract. Soon, the man reverted back to his old self. He collapsed in a heap of blood and debris and fell into unconsciousness. Kirishima stood and brushed himself off. The man in the hood approached him. "Are you all right?" he said. "Yeah, thanks to you," said Kirishima. "I gave it everything I had and barely held my own." "You did better than you think," said the man, giving him an appraising look. "What's your name, kid?" "Red Riot, sir," said Kirishima, bowing. "Green Arrow," said the man, bowing as well. Kirishima stared in shock. You're with the Justice League." "That's right," said the Arrow. He then snapped his fingers. "You must be Midoriya's friend. He wasn't exaggerating when he said you were strong." "He said that," said Kirishima. "And then some," replied the Arrow. He walked past Kirishima and over towards the unconscious criminal. He knelt down next to him and picked up the small red canister he injected himself with, inspecting it. "What is that stuff?" said Kirishima. "Something very dangerous," said the Arrow, placing the canister in his utility belt. "It wasn't supposed to have made it this far out of Gotham," he added, more to himself. He stroked his beard in thought before glancing at Kirishima. "I'll need you to keep silent about this, kid," he said. "It's better people not know this stuff is out there." "Why, yes, sir," said Kirishima. "Red Riot." A voice came from behind them. Fatgum was running quickly towards the two heroes. "Are you okay, kid? Don't go running off like that." "I'm sorry, sir," said Kirishima. "He's better than okay," said the man in the hood. "This kid single-handedly took down this criminal. I've rarely seen such courage and fortitude." "You don't say," said Fatgum. Suddenly his face lit up. "Hey, you're from the League. I've heard you guys just started setting up shop, but I thought you were in Musastafu. What are you doing here?" "Actually, I was coming here to meet with your agency," said the Arrow. "The League is teaming up with several other agencies for a project, and we'd like to bring you in on it." "A chance to work with the Justice League," said Fatgum. "Whatever it is, I'm in." Amajiki, said Kirishima as his senpai approached them. Are you okay? I'm fine, said Amajik, covering his face with his hood. But I cannot use my quirk. What? Said Kirishima, alarmed. Whatever that criminal shot me with is preventing me from using my quirk, said Amajiki. Don't worry, it's not permanent, said the arrow. It'll wear off in a few hours. How do you know that? Said Fatgum. Because that's one of the things I came to discuss with you, said the arrow. Let's get these kids to a hospital and head back to your agency. We have a lot to talk about. Izuku stretched slightly, stopping only for a moment as he exited the dormitories of UA High School. Oliver had called him an hour ago and told him to head over to the Justice League agency. He would be attending a meeting today with Nighteye and several other agencies and wanted him to be present for it. He said he could wear his school uniform as his hero costume wouldn't be necessary today, and after the meeting he would be returning to class. Izuku could hardly wait, but also felt nervous. This meeting would be unlike anything he's attended before, as Bruce often kept things short and informal in all the mission briefings he attended. He rarely worked with other agencies as well, so he had little experience working with others outside the Bat Clan and his fellow students. What's more, these would be seasoned professionals he would be working with. He paused as he noticed Kirishima standing at the base of the steps, turning to face him in surprise. Oh, he said. Good morning, Midoriya. Are you off to your work study too? Yeah, said Midoriya. I just got called in again. Same here, came a voice behind them. Uraraka and Asui were both standing at the door leading into the dormitory. Let's walk to the train station together, said Asui. Once they got there, they would part ways to their various destinations, but they could at least enjoy each other's company while they could. However, as they got there, they noticed that they were all going to the same location. Not just them, but many other heroes as well, most of them in costume. Izuku knew it was not a coincidence, and that they must have been tapped by Oliver to assist in the Hasekai case. His assumptions were correct as they all approached the Justice League agency. Izuku was surprised to see not just Tagata, but also Amajiki and Hado waiting for them as well. So many heroes were participating in this case, it was astounding to Izuku. It meant that this case was more complicated than he could have anticipated. As the students entered into the agency, they were floored to see it was filled to the brim with heroes. Izuku recognized almost all of them, such as Fatgum, Ryukyu, Rock Lock, and various others. He was also shocked to see that Aizawa was among them, talking with Bubble Girl, and a smaller, older hero in a yellow jumpsuit that Izuku wasn't familiar with. You're here too, Mr. Aizawa, said Uraraka. I got roped into this at the last minute, Aizawa replied. They haven't been very forthcoming yet, but I have a rough idea of what it's about. So should you, said Ryukyu, walking up beside them. She was accompanied by Black Canary, and the students bowed respectfully. Glad to see you all could make it, said Black Canary. She turned to Nighteye, who was standing next to Green Arrow. Looks like we're all here. Very good, said Nighteye. They all took a seat at a large conference table, with Nighteye, Green Arrow, and Black Canary standing at the head of the table. Izuku looked around at all the heroes in amazement. Whatever was happening had to be big. His eyes drifted over to the older, yellow-clad hero, who Izuku just noticed was actually staring at him. Izuku quickly looked away uncomfortably, but could still feel the old man's eyes on him. Thanks to all the information you provided, our investigation has progressed substantially, said Nighteye. We have gathered you all here today to a shared conference where we can discuss all the intel we have acquired regarding the Yakuza group Shai Hasekai. I feel like I'm missing something important, said Kirishima. Who are these guys? A small-time organized criminal syndicate, said Green Arrow. The Yakuza has been quiet for a long time, mainly dealing with small-time rackets such as gambling or drugs. But we believe this group may be moving into larger, more dangerous ventures, so the Justice League and Nighteye Agency have been monitoring their activities. What prompted this investigation? Said one of the heroes. An accident involving a gang of thieves called the Reservoir Dogs, replied Nighteye. The police believed it to be an accident, but there were a number of details that did not add up, so we began tailing them. We have discovered that over the past year, the Hasekai have made contact with several groups outside of their organization, including groups who have less than reputable business practices. We believe they intend to expand their organization, said Black Canary. Most significantly, they have made contact with the League of Villains through one of its members, Jin Bubegawara, alias Twice. An image was projected onto the wall, showing a photograph of the villain Twice entering a car with Chisaki. Izuku clenched his fists. He was one of the villains that was present at the training camp when he was captured. Seeing him brought back unpleasant memories. They were wary of being followed, and we lost track of them, said Green Arrow. but we were able to learn of an altercation that happened between the two groups. The image on the wall changed to a warehouse, where the outer wall looked as if it had been smashed open. That's when Detective Tsukachi, Batman, and I were contacted, said the yellow hero. They figured we'd be able to assist, given the League's involvement. Izuku was surprised to hear his mentor's name being mentioned by this hero. Bruce had not told him of his involvement in any investigation, but he always kept such things on a need-to-know basis. "Where are Batman and Tsukachi?" asked one of the heroes. "Tsukachi is interviewing eyewitnesses," said the yellow hero. Batman was unavailable, but he sent the next best thing in his stead, his ward. The hero nodded over to Izuku, who jumped slightly in surprise as everyone looked at him. "The child," said Rocklock. "You can't be serious. I don't care if he is his student. Why did Batman send this kid instead of coming himself? Or does he not take this seriously?" "Batman takes everything seriously," the yellow hero continued. "We had a feeling that things were going to get ugly with the League of Villains involved. And though he's young, Midoriya has more experience with the League of Villains than most of us here. None of us can deny that. Or have you forgotten exactly what this boy has been through?" "Midoriya has been extremely helpful in this investigation," said Green Arrow. "It's because of his quick thinking and foresight that we were able to gather valuable data on the Hasekai and their leader, Chisaki. Through this data we were able to gather that their main source of income is from illegal drug sales. There's two drugs in particular that concern us the most." The slide changed, and the image before them caused many in the room to gasp in horror. A grotesque creature, at least 10 feet tall, with large, misshapen muscles ripping through its skin as they grew faster than it could handle, with bones and foul objects protruding from its skin. Izuku jumped to his feet, recognizing the creature immediately. "Titan," he whispered. It seems Professor Shield's worst fear had been realized. The Titan formula had somehow gotten out of Gotham, and was now being sold in the streets here in Japan. "What is that thing?" said one of the heroes. "This," said Green Arrow, "is a new breed of quirk-enhancing drugs known as Titan. It was created by Professor David Shield, originally as a way to help All Might recover from his injury and prevent his retirement. However, he was manipulated into making it by the Joker, and about a month ago there was an incident in Gotham that caused the drug to flood the streets. As you can guess, the slides changed, showing Gotham after the Titan attack. Gotham has suffered quite a bit of casualties, hence Batman's unavailability," said the yellow hero. "We recently found evidence of this drug in Asuha City," said Black Canary, "when Red Riot, one of Fatgum's work-study students, came across and helped to subdue the creature." She gestured over to Karashima, who scratched his head in embarrassment. "These creatures are fiercely dangerous. Along with increasing the subject's physical prowess exponentially, it also increases their quirk's natural abilities in the same way. And unlike other quirk-enhancing drugs, which wear off after an hour or two, Titan is lethal if the antidote is not administered within a certain amount of time." "So there is an antidote," said Rocklock. Black Canary nodded. "The Justice League has partnered with Wayne Tech to mass-produce and distribute the Titan antiserum to all hero agencies now that it has been confirmed to have reached Japan." "How did it get here in such a short amount of time?" asked one of the heroes. "The Joker only had a portion of the Titan formula from his correspondence with S.H.I.E.L.D., said Green Arrow. "We believe that he shared this formula with all interested buyers weeks or months before the events in Gotham transpired. The second drug we are concerned with," said Nighteye, "is one that we have not seen before, one that has the power to nullify quirks." A series of gasps echoed around the conference room, followed by concerned chattering. Fatgum stood and cleared his throat. "The event happened to Amajiki here during the fight with the Titan creature," he said. "He was shot with a projectile containing some sort of kind of drug that completely erased his quirk." "Whoa, Amajiki," said Tagata, standing suddenly. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," said Amajiki, transforming his hand into a cow's hoof. "The drug wore off while I slept. I can use my quirk just fine now, so the effects aren't permanent," said Rocklock. "No," said Nighteye, "but Eraserhead has some insight into this. It doesn't function like my erasure does," said Aizawa. "It is well known by scientists that there are certain genes in the body that are responsible for the production of quirks. For lack of a better description, these quirk genes are essentially the cause for quirk expression in Homo sapiens." Izuku had heard this before, and knew that this was the common consensus among scientists. However, he also knew that they did not have the whole truth. While it was true that the mutated genes were behind the manifestation of quirks, scientists had yet to discover the cause of these mutated genes, and simply attributed it to the next step in human evolution. However, the true cause of this mutation was through Brainiac's exabytes. Very few people were privy to that information, and for good reason. The exobites were designed by Brainiac to hide in a host's body for an unspecified amount of time while it gathered biological, genetic, genealogical, and various other information on its host. They were designed with a cloaking mechanism that made them indistinguishable from normal cells found in the body. Once the exobites had gained all the information Brainiac required, he would recall the exobites and collect all the data gathered from their hosts. This was how All for One was able to extract and transmit quirks upon his followers. When the exobites containing the information of a certain quirk were introduced to the body, the host's genes would mutate to express the quirk. Once removed, the genes would no longer express the quirk, and the body would return to its previous state. My quirk, continued Aizawa, shields the expression of those mutated quirk genes, but it doesn't change them in any way. After Tamaki was shot, we took him to the hospital, said Fatgum, and after running tests it was discovered that his quirk genes were no longer present in his body. It was as if he never had a quirk. Thankfully, his quirk seemed to return after a few hours, but we're unsure as to why that is. Nothing other than his quirk was affected by the drug. What do we know about the drug that he was shot with? Asked Nighteye. Next to nothing, said Fatgum. The guy who shot him has clammed up and won't tell us anything. And the round that hit Amajiki was totally spent. However, Kirishima managed to jump in front of Amajiki before a second round struck him. We've recovered the round, and it provided a viable sample. I did that, said Kirishima, surprised. Great job, Kirishima, said Uraraka. When we analyzed it, we discovered something disturbing, continued Fatgum. It contained human blood and cells. Izuku felt his heart grow cold at the sound of this. This meant that the substance inside the drug was engineered using the blood samples of another person. In essence, the Hisekai were packing a quirk that was capable of destroying quirks in easy-to-fire rounds. So how did you connect these two drugs to the Hisekai? Asked one of the heroes. Though drug distribution channels have shrunk since the old days, many still remain open, said Fatgum. And the perpetrator that Kirishima took down, the one who had used the Titan drug, was connected with a known drug trafficker who, after thorough interrogation, confessed to moving both drugs. He then was able to confirm that the Hisekai were responsible for bringing the Titan formula to Japan, having purchased it through one of their criminal networks connected to the Joker. He was unsure if they had manufactured the second drug, but was sure that they had a hand in its development. Don't you have anything a little more concrete in implicating them? Said the hero. Green Arrow changed the slide to reflect a profile image of Kai Chisaki, the man who Izuku and Toga had bumped into the other day. Kai Chisaki, Green Arrow said. Criminal name, Overhaul. His quirk of the same name allows him to completely break down matter and reassemble it at will. It doesn't take much to place two and two together, a man whose quirk can break down matter, and a bullet that can break down quirks. Additionally, when Toga and Midoriya came across Chisaki the other day, they noticed he had a daughter with him. There is no record of her birth or existence that we can find. Izuku felt his stomach drop to his feet. He exchanged looks with Toga, who seemed to be thinking the exact same thing he was. His thoughts flashed to Eri, the small child with Chisaki. She was covered in bandages and was terribly frightened at the time they had met her. She was obviously trying to escape whatever situation she was facing with Chisaki, and Izuku was desperately hoping that it didn't mean what he thought it meant. Midoriya was successful at planting a listening device on her before she went back with Chisaki. Green Arrow continued. And before communication was severed for unknown reasons, we managed to get this message. Arrow clicked a button and Chisaki's voice was projected through the speakers. You shouldn't run off like that, Eri, the voice said. People always get hurt when you disobey me. Remember, you're the key to my plan, to all that I'm trying to accomplish. Izuku's worst fears were confirmed. He's using her to produce these bullets, he said, horrified. Could he really do something so horrible? Said Rukyu. Unfortunately, yes, said the yellow hero. In a world of superhumans, if it can be dreamed, it can be done. At this point, the efficacy of the bullets are questionable, said Nighteye. It's possible that they are still in the testing phase. While we still have little evidence, we know that he is using these drugs to gather allies and funds from across the nation. You've seen what can be done with both drugs, said Green Arrow. Imagine if he is able to perfect both the Titan and quirk-destroying drug. Imagine an army of unstoppable monsters with quirks more powerful than anything you've ever seen, all the while being unable to stop them because your own quirks have been destroyed by the enemy. Imagine the devastation that he could bring. Would have saved a lot of trouble if these two amateurs would have taken her away from him when they had the chance, said Rock Lock, nodding to Izuku and Toga. I take full responsibility, said Nighteye. Both of them acted in the best way they could in this situation, risking their lives while attempting to rescue her, even without foreknowledge of the plan. Midoriya even provided some valuable intel regarding Chisaki and her involvement. Without it, we would not have gotten this far in the investigation. I assure you, no one is more frustrated than they are that they could not save this poor girl when they had the chance. Frustrated wasn't a word Izuku would have chosen to use. His blood was boiling. He could feel himself shaking as he replayed the mind in his head. He wished desperately he could go back in time and blast Chisaki down to molten ash before he had another chance to harm such a sweet, innocent child. The kind of monster that he was, to use someone so vulnerable to do something so evil made him angry beyond belief. He could almost feel the same coming from Toga next to him. His usual cheerful smile and demeanor was gone, replaced with a cold anger and dark shadow over his eyes. "We won't fail again," said Izuku. "We'll take the fight to Chisaki, we'll get Eri out of there, and we'll make sure he never hurts her again." "Indeed," said Nighteye. "That's precisely what we've come here to discuss. Because Eri is at the center of his operation, and she has been seen by 2 heroes, we can't be sure if he is going to be keeping her in one place. If we make an assault on his compound and she isn't there, it's unlikely we'll be able to find her after that. This makes our first strike crucial, and we need to know exactly where he's keeping her if we are to be successful." The image on the projector changed to show a geographical map of the main island of Japan with several points selected on it with the symbol of the Hisekai. "Each coordinate on this map is a location with known Hisekai connections," said Green Arrow. "We need all of you to investigate these areas that are closest to your respective home agencies. Right now I also have several of my sidekicks canvassing the area as we speak. Send back any data you have on the Hisekai, no matter how insignificant. The Justice League will compile and clean this data and analyze it to find out where the girl is located, and narrow down our additional targets." "I didn't take you guys to be such careful planners," said Fatgum. Nighteye, who's worked with All Might for so long, and Green Arrow, the most gung-ho league member they have. "We should just take the fight to them now, while we're taking out sweet time that poor girl's still out there." "We can't do this like All Might would," said Nighteye. "If we are meticulous in every detail in this plan from the outset, we will have the highest chance of saving her." "He's right," said the yellow hero. "We shouldn't rush. If we show our hand and don't end up rescuing her, then we'd just be throwing flames on the fire. For example, Stain's capture was a beacon for other factions to seek out and join the League of Villains." "I have a question," said Aizawa. "I don't know the specifics of your quirk, Nighteye, so feel free to correct. But from what I've heard of it, your quirk allows you to see into the future. So why not use it on us? That seems like a logical step." "I'm sorry," said Nighteye, "but I cannot. My foresight has some limitations. I need a full 24 hours between activations. I get one person and then I'm spent for the rest of the day. Additionally, the image appears in my mind much like a film strip to a video player. However, everything I see is from a tight perspective on the Syrian in question. This severely limits my capacity to interpret context. It should still provide more than enough information to be useful, don't you think?" asked Aizawa. "And it doesn't explain why you can't." Nighteye adjusted his glasses uncomfortably. "What if I saw imminent death in your future?" he said quietly. "Worse, what if it was a cruel, merciless demise?" "Death is still information," said Rocklock. "If we see it we can find a way to avoid it." "You don't understand," said Nighteye. "What is seen in my vision may be unavoidable. I have not had a wrong prediction to date." He grew silent for a moment. Izuku knew why. He was reflecting back on what he saw in All Might's future. He was afraid to use his quirk to such a capacity again. If what he said was true, and all of his predictions to date came to pass exactly as he saw it, then, in a way, it is not implausible to think that he might be worried that it is his foresight that is causing the event itself to happen. "No," said Nighteye. "My foresight should only be used after we have confirmed the highest likelihood of success, then it can help us ensure our victory. It shouldn't be relied upon when there are still too many uncertainties." "The most important thing here is that there is a child in trouble," said Black Canary. "We should get started." "We're counting on your help," said Green Arrow. "All of you." And with that, the meeting was adjourned. Izuku, Toga, Kirishima, Uraraka, Asui, Hato, and Amajiki all sat around one of the tables outside the conference room. Both Izuku and Toga were racked with guilt over letting Chisaki get away with Eri. "I should have known," said Izuku. "Those bandages, how scared she was. I should have known that she was more important than just being his daughter. If I had taken her then, Batman could have taken her to Gotham with him, or the Watchtower with the whole Justice League there to protect her. Some detective I turned out to be." "Aw, man," said Kirishima sympathetically. "That's frustrating. But you shouldn't blame yourself. We know you tried." "Deku," said Uraraka. "Gotham," said Asui suddenly. They all looked at her questioningly. "They said that the Titan monsters suddenly appeared in Gotham a month ago." Isn't that around the time you were there, Midoriya? Izuku jumped in surprise. He had forgotten just how astute Asui was, and just how unafraid she was to speak up about the elephant in the room, even when others were too uncomfortable to do so. You said that nothing happened while you were there, said Uraraka, standing up. I'm sorry, I lied to you, said Izuku, lowering his eyes. It was an effort to keep news about the Titan formula from getting out of Gotham, although it seems that doesn't matter anymore. Wait a second, said Kirishima. You were there to fight those Titan monsters. Yes, said Izuku slowly. All eyes were now on him around the conference table. He sighed deeply. He began to explain the details of his excursion into Gotham. David's shield, the Joker, the Titan monsters, even the Red Hood. His friends all stared at him in silence as he finished the story. You really fought the Joker, said Kirishima, amazed. Not really, said Izuku. Not directly anyway. Do you think he's involved in this? Said Hado. No, I don't see how he could be, said Izuku. He's in a full body cast in Arkham. What happened to the Red Hood? Asked Asui. Izuku shook his head. I don't know, he said. He disappeared. I can't believe you kept this from us, said Uraraka crossly. I'm sorry, said Izuku, but you can't tell anyone about this. Seriously, said Kirishima. Seriously, Izuku said. Not even my mother knows. If she did, she would never have let me come back to UA. Please, we won't say anything, said Tagata. But don't you think you should say something to Sir? Maybe it could help. I don't think so, said Izuku. Batman already briefed the Justice League on the event, and anything I would know the Green Arrow would already know. I guess so, said Tagata. Everyone looked up as they heard the door to the conference room open. Green Arrow and Aizawa walked through the door towards the students. What is this, a funeral? Said Green Arrow. Mr. Aizawa, Mr. Arrow, said Uraraka, standing and bowing. Call me Eraserhead outside of school, said Aizawa. Don't get me started on this Mr. Arrow nonsense, said Green Arrow, laughing. It's Oliver to my friends. Aizawa sighed, scratching his head. Here's the thing, he said. Before you got involved in all this, I was going to recommend your work studies be suspended. What? Said Kirishima, standing. Why would you do that? Were you not listening when they said the League of Villains were involved? Replied Aizawa. That changes things. Izuku could hardly believe what he was hearing. It was his fault that Eri was back in the hands of that monster, and now he was about to be prevented from correcting that mistake. He would do anything to help that poor child escape her monster of a captor. As if reading his mind, Aizawa sighed again. Listen, he said. You lot haven't fully earned our trust back. And even though Midoriya wasn't to blame for the Camino Ward incident, he has a knack for getting into dangerous situations. I'm positive that if I try to stop you now, you'll do something reckless and attempt to take things into your own hands. So I'm gonna watch you. If you're going to see this through, you'll need to use your head. I'll be with you too, said Green Arrow. Batman will never forgive me if something were to happen to you. I'll only say this once, just to give you a little peace of mind, said Aizawa. Just because you didn't hold on to her this time, doesn't mean you didn't give Eri hope. And it doesn't mean that the next time you'll fail to rescue her. So keep looking forward. He's right, Midoriya, said Tagata. Next time, we'll definitely save her. So, that was the would-be successor, eh? Said Gran Torino, watching the kids walk away from the window of the conference center. He was standing next to Sir Nighteye. It felt like a lifetime ago since they had worked together, since All Might's injury and All for One's fall. The dissolution of their partnership had been hard on them both, though neither of them would admit it, and he hoped one day they would see past their foolishness and mend things, though that looked more and more unlikely as the years went on. Yes, said Nighteye. It's serendipitous that he should be working together. You're not really surprised, are you? Said Gran Torino. No, said Nighteye. So what are your thoughts about him? Said Gran Torino. The actual truth. I think he and All Might are very similar, said Nighteye. Especially when it comes to the madness living deep within. The one I could never understand. The only other person besides All Might I could see that was in. He trailed off, growing silent. Batman, Gran Torino finished for him. Yes, said Nighteye. But it is unlikely that he will accept One for All, and time is running out. You mean your vision, said Gran Torino. Nighteye nodded. If All Might should perish before One for All is transferred, then it will die with him. But he won't give it to anyone but Midoriya, said Gran Torino. Precisely, said Nighteye grimly. He won't listen to reason. You're both stubborn, said Gran Torino, chuckling. But the only thing we can do is trust that he knows what he's doing. I suppose, said Nighteye. So, about this case, said Gran Torino. You really think we should wait on using your quirk? I do, said Nighteye. Rock, Lock, and Eraser aren't wrong, said Gran Torino. It could provide some valuable insight into the case. No, said Nighteye firmly. A long silence stretched between them before Nighteye finally broke it. but there is someone else I can go to for help. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 9. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.